All right. Good morning. Good morning. If everybody wants to find their way towards a table and grab a seat. The herd is thinning, but we still have our loyal followers. So thank you all for joining us for day two. I hope everyone had a very fun and productive evening. It was great to see so many of our rural champions being honored last night. I do want to just take a minute to honor those who are still with us, or if they're not, their names will be flashing above the screen. But Marcia, Suzanne, Lee, Tim, Pam, and Andy, huge congratulations and thank you all so much for your support to rural. So today we have just coordinated a half day of stimulating conversations on rural workforce and small business. I need my peepers because I'm getting old. You will sense a theme of today, quick conversation, movement, and insight, all designed to help us explore the innovative ways our colleagues, allies, and friends are addressing challenges and issues impacting the workforce and small business in rural America. I want to once again take this opportunity to thank our ruralist funders and supporters who are helping us to make this gathering possible, as well as joining with us to support one another's great work. So with that, I think it's a good time to make a transition and bring two of those wonderful faces to the stage. Let's begin with Bill Turner, who's the Chief Program Delivery Officer of the Rework America Alliance. Give him a hand. He's so talented. And then Kirsten Nito, who's a program officer with the Syndium Education Group. All right, hi to both. How are y'all doing?
Great.
Good. Well, why don't we begin with just a quick round of introductions? Kirsten, do you want to start with telling us a little bit more about Syndium?
Yeah, sure. Good morning, everybody. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here for the past couple of days and to get to know all of you and hear more about your work. So I'm a program officer at Syndium Education Group. We are a nonprofit organization and a growing national philanthropy that's based in Madison, Wisconsin. All of our work at Syndium is very focused on ensuring that more learners from low-income backgrounds can achieve their education and career goals. So at Syndium, we believe that post-secondary education and training is really critical, but we also know that there are a lot of barriers that often get in the way of people being able to complete a degree or training. And so our philanthropic mission at Syndium is very clear. We want to make sure that we're removing obstacles to make sure that more learners have an opportunity to earn degrees or credentials that provide a meaningful path to jobs and upward socioeconomic mobility. And that last piece, I think, has been really, really important for us in the last few years, is making sure that folks are able to really not just get into a good job, but really into a good career that provides that path to upward mobility. And we have been very focused on learners from low-income backgrounds, but particularly individuals of color, incarcerated adults, veterans, and of course, in this case, rural community members. So we have 4 focus areas that really guide all of our grant making at Syndium. And I have the very great pleasure of leading our rural-focused efforts to increase post-secondary education and workforce training. So this focus area at Syndium just launched in 2019. We actually made our first grants in April of 2020, and we all know what was happening at that time. So it's been kind of a wild ride. But our decision to really go to focus on rural learners and rural communities was very intentional and very much driven by the data. As all of you know, there are very few philanthropic dollars that go to rural communities compared to urban and suburban communities. There's been a lot of discussion about that. And so at Syndium, we have been very intentional in really trying to fill that gap. And we also know that rural learners, compared to their urban and suburban peers, are behind at every point along the post-secondary pipeline, from enrollment to workforce entry. They enter and complete at lower rates compared to their urban and suburban peers. And so at Syndium, with our mission to really ensure that more learners are able to earn a degree or credential, we saw it as an equity imperative to make sure that we were not forgetting about 20% of the population that identifies as rural. And so we've explicitly called them out as an important part of our strategy. Is it okay if I talk a little bit about some of the examples of our grants? I don't want to take up too much time.
Only if we're the like star of that show.
Well, I will absolutely be.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. So I'm going to save the best for last, actually. So there are three kind of priorities that guide our grant making in our rural focus area at Ascendium. So the first one has really been about investing in high quality research. I think about research as a flashlight, really being shining a light on the solutions that we know are effective, to help shine a light on the solutions that we all have to spend our very limited resources on implementing. And it just helps us to understand kind of what works, right? There is very, very limited research that uniquely centers rural learners or rural institutions or rural serving organizations. And so actually just earlier this year, we launched a big RFP to identify research projects that would help us to identify the very specific practices, policies, and programs that help rural learners earn a degree or credential or complete training and move into the workforce. And in addition to understanding just what those programs are, wanting to better understand how rural institutions and organizations go about implementing those. In an environment with limited resources, with fewer organizations, how do you go about implementing these reforms or these strategies that we know have worked in urban and suburban places, but can't just be picked up and dropped into a rural environment, right? We have to think about how to tweak and adjust those, and there has to be research to help guide that decision. We also are really focused on supporting the adoption and scaling of strategies that support persistence and completion and workforce success for rural learners. And so we really want to scale up programs that we know are working to help more learners succeed and get those good jobs that provide that path to upward mobility. So earlier, or late last year rather, we actually invested in a program that's supporting 15 rural community colleges throughout the country to help them implement a national reform framework that ensures that the moment a student steps on campus at a community college, they have access to employers and advising and all of the supports needed to complete that degree and know exactly how they're going to use that degree and apply that at a job in their local community. It's a really important framework that has been adopted, I think, at a number of urban and suburban institutions, but really hasn't been adopted in rural communities, and we want to bring those practice to rural community colleges. Our third priority at Ascendium has really been about strategic partnerships between and among post-secondary providers, employers, and workforce training stakeholders. This is where the best comes in, right? Rural LISC and the Rural Works effort. This was one of the very first investments that we made when we launched our rural focus area. And we have learned so much from Justin and the entire Rural LISC team and the work that so many of you are doing each and every day to really understand all of those moving parts and pieces to building a really strong workforce ecosystem. We know that everything that you do really requires very deep collaboration among multiple partners and systems. And we are trying to really elevate and understand what those best practices are so that we can take these lessons learned and share them nationally. So at the end of the day, all of Ascendium's investments are very focused on post-secondary and workforce training, but we really see those investments as supporting the broader community that you're all part of, because we know that a well-trained labor force and a strong labor force ultimately leads to a stronger economy and positive health outcomes and a thriving community in general, which is ultimately what we hope to see in rural places. So that's a little bit about Ascendium.
And I always just have to compliment them. You know, Ascendium really is the thing that catalyzed us all being here today. So they were a first in funder who sort of had this vision of where can we go with this in rural communities. And today alone, we have 20 plus rural workforce funding collaboratives around the country. And last year, those collaboratives served over 21,000 rural residents in their skill seeking. So, you know, we're always very appreciative of those philanthropies who, you know, aren't just interested in scaling, but like, let's test. And that's really what this was about. So always appreciative of that. So Bill, do you want to tell us a little bit more about Rework America Alliance and Markle?
Sure. So I'm going to talk about what the Markle Foundation is. It's a private foundation based in New York, but Markle typically funds initiatives. So one of the initiatives I'll go to in just a second got us all started on this path. And what I'm about to tell you may sound a little counter to what Kirsten was talking about as far as education, but it's not. So if you stick with me, I'll get to the point where it connects to what Ascendium's doing. So what we launched about 5 years ago was called Skillful, and it was Skillful, Colorado is the first state we went to. It was back, if you can remember, past the pandemic when unemployment numbers were low. Employers were having a hard time saying they can't find talent. People were looking for jobs, but the employers saying they can't find them. And so what we did is we launched Skillful to say, hey, why don't you try to focus on the skills that you need for particular jobs? And then we help career coaches or career navigators, or what do you want to call them, that help them connect the two. So they work with the clients, the job seekers, like many of you do. And then also the employers was change the way they describe their jobs so we can make that connection. So Skillful in Colorado was and still is a success. And so we expanded to Indiana for the second state. And that's where I came on board at the time as executive director for Indiana. Since that time, obviously, as we've said many times, 2020 happened where we had COVID, right? So we had more people unemployed with or without a degree. It was just a large amount of people without degrees. So at Markle, we're like, okay, how can we speed this up? We can't slowly go state to state. How can we expand and scale quicker? And so what we did is we ended up forming the Rework America Alliance. And in that alliance, what we have is about 40 different organizations. Hopefully one day we'll have Ascendium on there. 40 different organizations that are coming together, and we kind of convene them, and they're all focused on how can we help all communities, especially Black and Latino communities, move into better paying jobs. And let's focus on the skills. What tools and resources do I bring as an organization to this? It could be a funder, it could be a nonprofit, it could be for-profit companies like Boeing and Microsoft, et cetera. But we brought all these folks together, including training providers, to say, hey, how can we work on this as a team or an alliance? When we did that, though, one of the things that we and you heard this yesterday in the morning, is at least in the morning a couple of times, about you got to work on this together. We can't do this alone. Each of your locations, rural list in general, can't do it alone. Markle can't do it alone. So we have to bring people together. And so one of the things we thought about is, okay, we got all these tools and resources. We have tools that can help you write a job description. We have tools that can help employers ask the different type of interview questions so they can focus on the skills. We have tools for career coaches so they can become better coaches and better mentors for the people that are working with. And then we say, well, how do we get it to people? And so right now we have 4 what we call worker serving organizations that are part of the Alliance. We have the National Urban League is one obviously for the communities they work with. We have Unidos US for Latino population. We have Goodwill as a partner. And I left the best for last, I guess, since we're in here, is Rural List is a partner of ours. And the main reason, I'll just throw this in here, the main reason, not the only reason, but a main reason we asked and looked for Rural List is because we didn't have the rural voice, and we as an organization didn't understand the rural complexities, the rural needs, or the rural barriers. So we wanted that voice, and they have been great at helping us understand that and helping us direct our resources to those particular areas of the country as well. So as we've been building this, as the Alliance has been growing, and as we've been working with organizations, remember I said we started in Colorado, we were in Indiana, and since that time now we're in 10 different cities across the country. We actually have work we're doing here in Washington, D.C. We kind of count them as a state because we have a state network as well. We have over 30 governors who are part of our Rework America state network. And so those governors come together, and to have 30 governors, that means it's nonpartisan. It has to be, both sides of the aisle, all focused on workforce development within their state. What are they doing well? What are they doing that they need help on? And we bring those folks together. So it's not just the cities, it's not just the local community. We're also trying to bring the state leadership to the table as well. And over the years, so we've been doing this, Rework America is about 2 years old, but Skillful, we've been doing it for about 5 years. And what we've been learning in these communities, such as you heard, I don't know if Pat's in here this morning or not, but from Passstone, Passstone was the first affiliate that we've connected with Rural List, with support, for financial support, as well as technical support to help roll out the tools and resources so they can use it within their communities. And one of the things that we're finding out is that as we can educate employers, and so who in here has heard the word skills-based before, right? Yeah, I'm trying to get you guys to move so you get, so it's skills-based approaches, competency, et cetera. So employers say, yeah, we want to hire on skills, but they don't know how. And that's not a detriment to them. I mean, it's just something that they just didn't know how. So we created tools to teach them how to do it. And the great thing about being a nonprofit is that those tools don't cost them anything. The tools that we offer to career coaches don't cost anything. They're all supported from major funders. So we bring those funders together to make sure that we do that. So I'll just throw real quickly the location so you can have an idea of where we are. Colorado, Indiana, still going strong as a state. DC, I count them as a state. We're also in the north east side of the country. We're in Philadelphia with an Unidos affiliate. We're in obviously the Finger Lakes region with Passstone from Rural List. We're also in Atlanta, Georgia. You move over to Texas, we have an affiliate in Houston, Texas, and Austin that we're working with. Then if you go to California, we're in LA. And then if you go to Denver, we have the state, but we're also working with an affiliate in Denver. Then we're in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Detroit. So we're spread across the country intentionally to make sure that we're trying to reach multiple places. But it's just the beginning. So now as we move through our next strategic plan, we're trying to, how do we expand it faster? How do we scale it to get it to more rural communities? You know, working with Justin and team to try to get it to more rural communities. These tools and resources are not the end all be all. It's just a way to help if you think your community needs that help. And what we've been finding out is that's the case, most cases for employers, large or small. We started looking at small and medium-sized companies because they typically don't have the manpower to have a whole HR staff or et cetera, but it works for all companies. And we had some large employers in town earlier this week doing a convening showing how they're using the skills-based practices as well. So the way I can tie it back to what Kirsten was saying about Ascendium and training is that we're not anti-degree, we're not anti-certificate, but what we're saying is you're missing a lot of opportunity if you're an employer to find great talent that don't necessarily have those degrees. Because if you think about it, and the statistic is still around the same number, but if you're looking for somebody with a college degree and you don't have a particular reason or discipline that you want, you just give me a bachelor's. Then you're eliminating about 70% of the population across the country. And if you think about the Black population, Latino population, rural populations, that number is even higher when you look at their particular group. So you're losing that skill set that most of those people, or a lot of those people, have either through experience or working. I think we heard yesterday about folks working in the field. Maybe they help repair the trucks or the machines, but they don't get recognized of having that skill. So how can employers change that vision and how they look for people? How it ties to training is, hey, if you need additional training, first you found the talent, help skill them up, give them that badge, give them that credential, give them that certificate. If they need to go further, then that's fine too, but help them get there, but get them started, and it can help reduce the unemployment numbers that you have at your own particular employer, and find employees. So that's the gist of it. We really want to focus on the skills and the competencies from an employer piece and the career navigation and organizational side of it, because we need to make the two work together. And so that's a really high level nutshell what we're trying to do at Markle.
Thanks, Bill. And I think to just underline the point, because I think we've heard it a couple of times over the last couple of days, in rural America, post-secondary education doesn't necessarily mean degree seeking.
Right.
So there's so much that we are especially doing in this space around career technical education. So thanks for calling that out. Well, as the two funders who are willing to make sort of this explicit push and commitment to rural America, what do you feel is the role of philanthropy in rural communities?
Sure, I'm happy to kick us off. So I think that there are several roles that philanthropy should be playing in rural communities. And then I think Ascendium as a national funder actually has a few unique roles that we should be playing. So just in terms of general philanthropy, obviously, resources and support to make sure that the organizations have the resources needed to do that work well. And I think that requires both programmatic support and capacity building support, and really helping to fill the gaps in many ways of what state, local, and federal funding streams can't cover. Justin, you mentioned before, Ascendium's interest in sort of like kind of taking a risk, right? And I think that that's a huge role that philanthropy can play, is investing in new innovative programs or supporting organizations to take new risks and find new ways to solve some of the really complex challenges that you're trying to tackle in your work. I mentioned Ascendium's focus on research and evaluation, and I think funders can play a huge role in building data capacity and funding evaluations so that organizations can identify best practices. And then we can use that platform as funders to then share with government and other funders about, like, this is what we know works. This is what we should be directing our resources to make sure that we're making the most impact. And I think that Ascendium, as a national funder in particular, that's very focused on systems change, also has a few unique roles to play. So to my knowledge, Ascendium is really the only national funder that's explicitly focused on post-secondary education and workforce training, and has a very explicit call out for rural learners and communities in particular. And I think that comes with great responsibility, right? Of like, as a national funder using our platform, I think we have an opportunity to really shift the narrative about rural America. When I talk about our rural work with other funders who tend to focus on urban and suburban communities, there's this narrative of like, oh, well, rural America is Appalachia and it's white and it's poor and it's a very deficit-based lens. And I am always very quick to say, no, right? Like, rural America is increasingly diverse. There are tremendous assets. There is a very rich culture. And I try to be very intentional in ensuring that the way that Ascendium talks about its rural work is very asset-based and really lifting up the tremendous strengths and resources that we know exist in rural places. And I think it's also part of our responsibility at Ascendium to make sure that in our funding, we're sharing lessons learned about what's happening in rural communities. And when we're in rooms with other funders, always making sure that we're asking the question, well, what about rural, right? So funders go to a lot of conferences, grant makers for education and grant makers for effective organizations. And there are often very few conversations that are explicitly focused on rural. And so I'm always the one in the room raising my hand saying, like, so have you funded the rural communities, or what does this mean for like rural efforts, right? And so it's using our voice and our platform to really bring that awareness to other funders. And then I think in a lot of ways too, as a national funder, we have a unique role, I think, to, in our funding, provide cover to organizations that are trying to do some really interesting work and may not be able to fund it through other ways. And so our funding as a national organization can come in to provide that cover and to like provide some credibility in some cases that can help bring other funders in to supporting that work. So I think it's a distinction between like philanthropy in general and then specifically like how we're really using our platform as a national foundation.
Bill, same question?
Sure. So I totally agree with what Kirsten's saying. So one of the things that I've been finding out as I participate with more and more funders, more and more national partners, is that I think there's slowly becoming, and Kirsten, you can correct me if I'm wrong, slowly becoming this thing of we need to maybe we need to focus and maybe pool some or work on the same project at the same time. And let's try to dive. And I just had this conversation with a major funder of ours of the Rework America Alliance that just brought that up. Say, hey, how can we bring other funders to the table? And the reason being if you do, and I think we heard this yesterday, if you do a small amount of fundraise or support, and again, I'll just say that typically there's a board involved with all these major funders, right? If you can get the board to think about, you have program directors saying, hey, we need to give folks more time than a year and a half, 2 years to get this to change. But you have to show those metrics. You got to show, feedback on what's happening, what's doing, what you're doing well with the money. But that short period of time to try to change this massive system that has been put in place that has affected Black and Latino folks, rural folks, it's affected a lot of people. You can't do it overnight. And so as a funder is changing that mindset of maybe how can we do it now? Granted, dollars is a big deal of it, but if you're coming together, maybe you can provide more resources to make that work. So one of the things I also I'm a member of the Indiana Philanthropic Philanthropy Alliance, and where it's all the Indiana-based community funding, national, like the Lilly Endowment, they all come together within the Indiana for that. And I did a presentation to say, hey, even if you are in a rural community or urban community, a lot of times, especially in rural, that local funders may be the best convener of people in that community. How do you bring everybody together? How do you pull folks together based on that funding? And then how do you connect to somebody that may have more money than you do to help support that? Rural, I get it. There's as I said, I've been learning through with Justin and the team is that it's a different world, obviously, in some cases of the barriers and issues that you have. But man, if money isn't the only thing that can help, but if you can get that started. And so whenever I talk to other funders, and again, literally just had this conversation earlier this week about how can we bring more funders together to work on a problem together, that way getting more resources. So one of the things that we really try to do with Ruralisk and all of our partners is at least get them started and to give funding to get them started while we provide the technical assistance and take some of the things off of their plate to help folks move down this path that we were trying to promote. But again, it's going to take, when I talk about philanthropy, it's going to take more than just, Ascendium doing it by themselves or Markle doing it by themselves, because this problem is way too big, even, not just rural, just in general across the US. And so that's what I've been trying to work on. And people are starting to think about, funders are starting to think about that.
Well, as they're having that journey, like currently, what do you see as the inherent issues within the philanthropic system?
How much time
Towards
do we
rural
have?
America.
Yeah.
Look, you get me on this. I'd help you.
So, I think philanthropy, like any institution or system, right? Like there's a lot of limitations and blind spots that I think are present in our work. I think the most obvious one, and we've talked a little bit about it in the conversations, but the lack of funding in rural communities is that philanthropic organizations love to talk about scale.
Mhm.
Like we love scale, the impact of our work. And it's real easy as a funder to be like, well, why would we go to a place where we're only going to impact 1,200 students when we could impact 1.2 million, students in a different community? And I have a few responses to that, right? Like, what is scale? Who gets to define that, right? Like, what does it actually mean? And I think that there's really great value in thinking about the systems and structures that our funding can create, and really what that does for an entire community, no matter how big or small, rather than thinking about just the pure number of students that you're trying to impact. Prior to my time in philanthropy, I ran a collective impact partnership in rural southeastern Wisconsin. And I had several counterparts in Milwaukee. And our partners in Milwaukee would always be like, Kirsten, how the heck did you get the school superintendent and the community college president and the four-year president and the rural chamber leader in the same room, right? And I was like, well, I called them, right? And I asked them to be in the room, right? And they are at a lot of the same events during the week. And they're like, well, we can't, get our leaders in this big city to sit at the same table, right? And then in rural communities, I think doing a lot of that systems change work and like just having a little bit of funding to do that work and bring people together goes such a long way. And that has to be part of the conversation for funders about like what you're able to do and to sustain with rural funding. I'm not saying we shouldn't also fund in urban communities, right? But like, we shouldn't not go to rural places because we think we're impacting fewer people. I think there's a lot more to be said there.
One of my favorite things is, again, in the scale conversation, and what I tend to highlight to funders on that is because rural is a smaller scale, it's an easier demonstration
Yeah,
site
absolutely.
to create the proof points for urban.
Mhm.
So I think that's
Yeah,
just a perfect example of that.
yeah, yeah.
I interrupted.
No, that's great. It's great. It's absolutely right. And the other thing that I like to tell people, and I try to remind myself of this and try to remind my colleagues of this, is when we're looking at data, right? And we're looking at all of the performance measures that our grantees submit, and like, oh, we were able to impact this number of individuals here, and this number of credentials and this number of apprenticeships. I always encourage people to remember every single data point is a heartbeat. Okay. Every data point that we're looking at is a heartbeat. And let's actually think about the stories behind those data points and the individuals that we're able to serve, rather than losing sight of that in the conversation about numbers and forgetting what that number actually represents. And so I have a Post-it note above my desk that says that, and try to remind myself of that and what we do. And I think that there are other limitations just in the way that philanthropy operates, right? There was a great conversation yesterday about trust-based philanthropy. And if you go to, I think it's like trustbasedphilanthropyproject.org or something, there actually is a group of funders who are convening and trying to better understand kind of what trust-based philanthropy is and how their organizations can adopt that, right? As philanthropic organizations, we have a long history of having these massive application processes and requiring grantees to jump through multiple hoops before we actually get dollars out the door. And that means that organizations who are often in need of the greatest amount of funding aren't able to get it or secure it. And so I think that there are a number of things that Ascendium that we're doing well. There is always room for improvement. We can always be doing much better, right? And I'm happy to have a conversation with you about the things that I think we could do better. But I think we are really trying to refine and adapt our processes to make sure that the organizations that are most in need of support and the communities and populations that really need our dollars are able to get that. And so I think that philanthropy is always trying to think about those processes. And I think there's great conversations, but there's a lot of work to be done to ensure that more people are able to access those dollars.
True. Bill, thoughts on the limitations?
Yeah,
Of you?
what she said. I think, so the only thing I'd probably reiterate what I said a minute ago is I think there are organizations or philanthropy that really want to do things a little bit differently, but sometimes you have to get the buy-in of the entire board for organizations, and our board's no different. And it does come down to the metrics and how many, how effective were we, so we can, and this is not a negative when I say this, so please don't count as a negative, but we have to write up, how successful we were with that grant funding to make sure that we can do it again or do it in other places. But it does put a lot of burden on the actual grantee for an application process or filling out the documents. So one of the things we try to do is when we need the metrics back or the feedback back, we try not to make it a different report than you're already doing. So if you're capturing some data that kind of ties into what we're looking for, just give us that data. And so we're not saying go create this whole new report just for us. Give us what you're already doing as it ties to what we are trying to do. I think the other piece of it is, I'll go back again to how we can work better together as philanthropy. One of the things that we do with the work with our alliance is if we're working with an organization in a community, a local community or a national organization, we also, we have a grant period that we're going to start out with depending on, the funds we have, but we also are looking at the end of that. How do we help? And the one real great strength of Markle is we're great at convening and bringing other folks to the table. And so how do we bring other local funders to the table with that affiliate to help them support that going forward if we're not able to? So it's really about building that a collaboration if it's not there. Sometimes it's amazing. These are some pretty prominent organizations, but we'll come in and say, hey, have you talked to this person or this person? Just like Kirsten did, she just called them. Sometimes they don't know that even in their own community. So we help build that bridge, which then helps with the sustainability. But scale, that one word right there is one that, philanthropy looks at because it's how impactful were our dollars. And I love the heartbeat one because one of the things, so let me give you this as an example. When you think about as we go into the economy that we're going into and as we go into the future, when we talk about better paying jobs, or some people use good jobs, or however you want to quantify it, one of the things that people look at is like, oh man, there's when we talk about good jobs, there's only like 10 million good jobs that are out there, but we got all these people who don't have a job, or we aren't in those jobs, and people are looking for out of, I don't know, however many million. But I look at it the other way. There are 10 million opportunities to get somebody into a better paying job. Yes, we can figure out how to do the other millions, but let's get that 10 million in, and let's look at it that way versus trying to tackle the whole pie at one time. I like the analogy that was given yesterday about, you come to the table hungry and somebody says, well, I'll have the food for you ready tomorrow or next week. That's, you're ready now. And so what can we do now? And so that's, I think, the speed at which we can do things as a philanthropist, as a philanthropist, the speed that we can help you, the speed at which we can help you find more funding, all is a benefit, I think. And that's one of the things we're trying to work on with Markle as well.
Well, staying with you, Bill, I mean, what are you seeing as sort of the shifting trends and focus of workforce and small business and philanthropy?
So I think obviously small businesses can be impacted a lot quicker than a large company, especially when you're talking about digital technology, getting people trained in those skills, training of folks within their workforce because they don't have the funding to maybe do it internally. So all those things, and just finding the workforce. So Markle looks at it from a supply and demand side as well of, hey, as a small business, you don't have all the time that you need to go out and find this talent. Now, if you add to that, now you're a small business in a rural community, how does that look for you when the talent, your total pool of talent may be smaller than somebody in, say, a large metropolitan area? So it's really about helping that small business tweak the way they look for their resources as far as employees, helping them with changing their job descriptions, focusing on the skills. Again, we train them how to do that. We provide the technical assistance to do that so that they can change the way they look for it. So if you need the digital skills, we have partners in the Alliance that can provide those digital skills. I mean, IBM is a big partner of ours. They have a platform that provides those digital skills for folks at no cost. And so to me, that's one way to help a small business, but a medium and a large business as well. I was just, before I came down this morning, I think it was Good Morning America, one of them, I don't remember the name of the town, but it's in Illinois that they did the Groundhog Day movie. Woodstock. And so they were talking about, and they're talking to the mayor about, what makes Woodstock so unique. And and this came up yesterday too. He said that there's only one national business in our town. Everything else is a locally owned small business. So everything you buy from, clothing to gas to whatever is locally owned. You can't do that in every community, right? You can't do that. But the point being, that's one way to support a small business, is that you're set up and you're supported within your town. But then when you can't do that, how can somebody else come in and maybe help out? And one way that we focus on is one with your talent and then training of your talent. One thing I didn't mention earlier is one of the things we do with our career coaching. It's not just with WSOs or worker serving organizations or community-based organizations. We also do this training with college and career counselors at high schools. So we train folks to help people focus on the skills they have, help guide them down the path to what degree or certificate they think about. We have Ivy Tech Community College in Indiana. I'm from Indianapolis. Ivy Tech is the statewide community college, so there's only one community college, which is unique for the country. But Ivy Tech has had retention problems or completion problems, right? But what they found out is if they can help career coach the people coming into Ivy Tech or already there, focus on the skills. We've provided some of that training. They've now seen, and this, I'm going to say this number, but they haven't rolled it out. I probably shouldn't say it, but let's just say they had a better increase on retention. I won't say it because I won't get in trouble. They had a higher rate of retention for those that were coached or career counseled, if you will, versus those that weren't. And the number of Black students that retained or stayed and are on the path to completion increased with a counselor talking to them and helping them on the path versus not. Now you might say that makes sense, but it's not normal. So to me, helping small businesses with the problems they have, connecting them to those local communities or whatever training is in that area, to me is one of the things I think we're going to have to help with small businesses as they move forward.
I think I think Bill's exactly right. I think the skills-based work that Markle is doing is so exciting and really is going to be a trend that we continue to see. And I think, as Bill alluded to earlier, while they're focused on very skills-based and Ascendium has been very focused on kind of post-secondary degrees and credentials, I actually think that there has to be like a both and with this work, right? Of like employers recognizing the skills that folks have so that we can get folks into good jobs without having these arbitrary requirements for BA degrees. At the same time, recognizing that as the needs of small businesses or medium or large businesses to evolve, there is this need for continued training, whether that happens on the job through work-based learning opportunities or through shorter term credentials, micro credentials, non-degree credentials, right? There's like this growing lexicon of all of these opportunities. And I think we're really trying to better understand at the end of the day, like, it doesn't matter, right? Like how you go about getting, that training. There just has to be a focus on making sure that the training folks are getting are directly aligned with the needs of what employers are looking for. And so I think that collaboration between employers, post-secondary institutions, workforce training providers, that is going to have to continue to be essential and core to everything that we're doing, so that everything that folks are investing their very limited and precious time in is actually, going to help land them a job and a meaningful career.
Awesome. Well, I think that kind of wraps up our conversation, and I think it's a good place to sort of turn it over to the audience for Q&A. So before we get to the virtual questions, are there any within the room?
My question is for Mr. Turner. I know that you said that y'all provide digital skills for small businesses. I was just wondering, like, where do y'all cover? I tried to look you up on the internet too. I can't find it. So, like, what individuals, like, how do you decide like who to help? Because we work with small businesses, and a lot of them have issues with tech. They're not tech savvy, and so it'd be interesting to get you all to kind of assist with it.
So great, yeah. So that is exactly what we try to do with the Alliance is we don't know all the different places that this help is needed. And if you think it, first of all, let me back up. As I said earlier, we don't come in and say, hey, if you do this, you're going to be, everything's going to be all great and you're never going to have to worry about anything. That's not it. We're saying, hey, here's what we offer. Does it make sense for you? If it does, here it is. We're going to give it to you. And to your point about how do we help businesses in different places, one, we try to work with the local organization or somebody in that area. We have a program called Activator Program, where we train people in local places or in organizations that we train them on our skills-based practices or our training for employers. So that person can actually train the employer in that particular area or others around it. We do it virtually. If you're local, we can do it as well. But that's what we try to do is support, organizations or local municipalities. Now, one thing we don't do We don't go door to door going to every small business. We try to work through intermediaries within that area that can get to the small business. Maybe it's a chamber, maybe it's an organization, whatever it is, we try to work through them to train the folks in the area, because the people in the area, we don't. So
Exactly.
we can, it's again, if you look under the under resources on the website and look for the employer work, you'll see all the things that we offer for employer.
Okay, thank you so much.
And just let us reach, I think there's a contact thing in there. If not, do you have mine? Well, you can reach me as well if you have information you want to get.
You'll be hearing from me.
Okay,
Thank
sounds
you.
good. Sounds good. There goes to that scale piece, by the way. Get the more people
Yeah.
we can get the information.
I want to talk about skills-based hiring. Very supportive of the practice, but I'm curious kind of what's going to stick long-term versus what is kind of reaction to a very tight labor market, because even, with employers that aren't being mindful of skills-based hiring, we see them drop requirements left and right. And I worry if there's a recession next year that any of the gains that we've had on skills-based hiring or just right-sizing job descriptions and requirements are going to go away. So just wanted to get you kind of to reflect on that, Bill. And I know you were doing this before the labor market got extremely tight. Wanted to kind of hear about your experience then versus now, and maybe what the future holds with the crystal ball.
Sure. So, yes, that is a focus of ours, to make sure that we try to help not let that happen. And one of the ways we do it, I didn't go through all the details of the employer training we have, but part of that employer training is about us helping an employer change their internal systems. So it's not just that first job they hire somebody on skills. So let me back up one thing, and then I'll get to the. So what we found is this: we can get employers to change at least one position that they're having a hard time finding for job employees for. Change it, make it skills-based, maybe one or two, and see how that works. What happens is their talent pool grows. They get more applicants because it's skills-based. They get a more diverse applicant pool. It happens every time. And they find more qualified applicants within that pool. We also have numbers on retention of hiring that way. So we're also trying to show employers the ROI if they do it this way, so that if they continue, it makes a difference. But during the training that I mentioned, we also talk about that. How do you change your practices internally so that it doesn't revert back, right? It's changing that system that you have so it doesn't go back to the other way. And most companies start with those one or two, and they end up spreading it. I mean, we just talked to, there's several, large corporations have changed it, and some are spreading it to almost all jobs in the organization. There's a major insurance company called Zurich. They're basically dropping everything if they don't need it. Now, there are jobs that need a degree. There are jobs that get you in the door that if you want to move, you need to go back and get additional schooling. But it's once people grasp it, once we train them, they tend to shift it. So, but we're still worried that, to your point, that, it's easy to revert back. Okay, we just want degrees and let's just, but I think if we can show the employer the ROI of doing it this way, they tend to stick with it, especially if leadership's on board.
Hi, John Niederman. I'm a Fahy Fellow, but also based in Northeast Indiana.
Okay.
So I know Skill Up from being on the workforce board in Northeast Indiana for many years.
Yep.
But my question is, it has to do with one of the other topics that we're talking about a little later on this morning, but also talked about yesterday. It has to do with small business and rural communities especially, but it has to do with how do we generate additional folks who want to start a business? And that in a post-secondary environment, much of our career education and skills are dedicated to helping students who want to work for an employer. But not necessarily for students who might want to work for themselves. And as we all know, about 64% of the new jobs created in the United States is created by very small businesses. So my question is, as you take a look at how you work with post-secondary credentials, but how you work with the vast majority of the students out there, how do you integrate in, or are you integrating in some type of entrepreneurial mindset that would also generate with these students as they get their technical credentials or as they get advanced education, that they then use it possibly to create a business in their local communities.
Yeah, I think that that's a really great question. And I think that there are a few partners that we have talked to throughout the country who are really thinking intentionally about how to do just that. Like, how do we embed coursework or mentorship opportunities within a post-secondary curriculum to help students really think about, yes, you might be interested in tech, right? But like, do you know how to like manage the books? And like, how do you go about creating a business plan? And how do you find mentors? And I think that we haven't found, like any silver bullet opportunities yet, but I know it's something that folks are thinking really intentionally about. And I think it absolutely is the future, and something that has to be really intentionally embedded into those post-secondary opportunities. So I wish I had some really strong examples, but it's absolutely something that's top of mind for us. And I know many of the rural post-secondary institutions that we work with throughout the country.
Hello, I am Jillian, representing the entire virtual community. I do want to say one of the quotes that's really from y'all's conversation that you both have iterated, but they quoted Kristen specifically, behind every data point is a heartbeat. And so both of you have said it in different ways, but I feel like that had a lot of reaction. One of the questions is, again, it comes down to the data, or data, depending on where you live in the world. How can you help funders see a greater value in qualitative survey and research results gained from their funding efforts?
Great question. I think that there is, this is another quote that I always like to tell people, right, is like, there's always a rich story behind the data, right? So like, we'll get all of this information about, like X number of people completed a credential, X number of people, persisted from their first semester to their second semester. And that's really great. And we love to be able to see that. And in our reporting opportunities, we also provide a space for people to tell us what those qualitative stories are. And a few years ago, we did some work with tribal colleges and universities throughout the country. And I think the work that we did with the TCUs helped us to like really shift our focus and value qualitative data and stories in a really different way, because there were so many examples where the TCUs would say, storytelling is such an important part of our community and our culture. And we have several examples where a student didn't necessarily complete a degree, but they completed a course and really found their passion and moved into a job in the community that was, we really needed to fill and is really advancing some important work. And so on paper, that doesn't look like a success for us. But here's the story about how that absolutely is a success for this person and for our community as a whole. And so I think we really want to hear those stories from individuals and really want to find a way to make sure that, when we're talking to our board or to the folks that, hold us accountable, we're just sharing our lessons. We try to incorporate as much of that qualitative data as possible because it is so important. And so I encourage people to really make sure that no matter what your reporting template looks like for your funder, find a way to tell those stories, because I think it really does make an impact. It may not seem like it seems meaningful, but those stories are shared internally within the organization in a way that really does, I think, change perspectives and opinions.
Yeah, no, I was just going to make sure, I just want to jump in on that too, because I think that's a big push on our end from Markle Foundation. I know my colleague Joy Coates is in the room as well. And she knows, she talks to a lot of the local affiliates. And one of the things is, okay, tell me what's happening. What are the stories? Who's getting what? Who's been moving, et cetera, because we want that. And to Kirsten's point, we use that when we talk to our board about the impact. It's not just the data. There's a story behind a lot of times that data And that's what grabs the board typically. Yes, they want the numbers, but if you can give some, the strong, so we're always, as a matter of fact, we are getting ready to launch our own internal platform that captures the qualitative and the quantitative data, so that we can have it all in one place, so we can pull up those stories when we do articles or talk to board or whatever, because those are important. So we totally agree to get that information.
And it seems like a good space and time to also elevate that come January, Kirsten and I are co-authoring a paper with Aspen Opportunity for Youth around scale and collecting that quantitative and qualitative data and how it's best framed to not weaponize against
Right.
rural, but make us seem as if it is an asset-based approach,
Yeah.
which it is.
Yeah.
So please stay tuned for that. I know that we will be pushing that out on all of our social media platforms and likely websites. So happy to answer any further questions there.
Hello, Terry Sanders from the Ozarks in southern Missouri. I'm going to take a little bit of a broader view here and kind of derail where we've been maybe, but that's not a bad thing.
And
Over
Terry, will
the-
you pull up to the mic just a
Okay, is that better?
Yep.
Over the past number of years, many of our rural communities keep seeing declines in population. With all of that outward migration, we have talent that leaves our area and never comes back. My whole overall question, have there been any successes, or do you have thoughts about blending investments in workforce activities with creative placemaking or other things that celebrate our history and our cultures and keep that alive throughout the country?
Yeah, and I think that's really what the thought process was around Rural List launching a pillar-based strategy. So for us, it's about comprehensive placemaking and economic development. One pillar can't stand on its own to actually bring back, revive rural communities or sustain it. So it's really us thinking through workforce, small business, broadband development within your community, housing, capital access. And I'm forgetting one, and that person's going to kick me. But that's sort of our thought process. Is it's going to take a lot of different programs. Now, there are places around the country that we are highlighting of net migration to rural communities, and what are the things that we can do to help foster that growth. One of the biggest things is being very welcoming to the Latinx community. So the places where we are seeing rural growing, it's actually in migration from Latinos. The rural communities that are contracting are the ones who aren't building in that population. We're also seeing recreational economies grow at a very rapid scale post-COVID. So, I mean, I think there's some ideation there of how do we use our not only natural resources, but our cultural assets to capitalize on this sort of new world where there's a flex code economy. And as that fourth wave, revolution happens to the workforce, and people can actually, live in the Itabena, Mississippi's or the Tuttle, North Dakotas, but work for a company in Los Angeles. Like, how do we keep scaling that to where our economies become more viable? We're seeing a huge uptick, especially in the small business space, because your overhead's cheaper. As cities are gentrifying and we're seeing interest rates go up, I can say that because the Fed's not with us today, so they can't check us on monetary policy. But as housing costs continue to increase, we're seeing areas that are more to the peripheral of cities become a lot more attractive, which might not necessarily always be the solution for someone living in the frontier, but certainly for those of us who live in tier 2 and tier 3 rural markets that are near a major metropolitan area. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, especially in the future, more than there has been the last 20 years, to really capture some net migration into rural, even though during the last census, we actually saw the first contraction.
Joseph Caesar, Legacy Institute, Lufkin, Texas. First of all, Chris and I appreciate the fact that you get it. And Mr. Turner, you get it as well. And it's refreshing to hear that. Our community, Lufkin, Texas, 35,000 people. We're 23% African-American, 32% Hispanic, which means that we have a majority minority community. And unfortunately, the job market, the good jobs typically don't go to those demographics. And our organization, we've worked very hard to try to create equity in that space. So it's probably not as much of as a question as it is a comment. I appreciate the work that you're doing. I appreciate you looking at the rural communities and seeing as a funder how you can play a role. We have been blessed with a funder, a local funder who introduced us to LISC, and that has changed the dynamic for our organization, and it allowed us to leverage and multiply the funding that they did give to us. And that has created a huge impact. The majority of our clients are minority. And we have found that just with a little bit of skilling and training and making them aware of what opportunities are out there, non-degreed opportunities, it's actually having an impact. Some of the clients that we work with, they just refuse, at this point, they're refusing to work at those jobs that have no upward mobility. We've got several employers in town that will hire them at $8 an hour, $10 an hour, and people, they're just saying, I'm not going to go there. I would rather stay unemployed. But when we tell them about CDLs, heavy equipment operator, we talk to them about diesel fuel technology and those certifications that will lead to very good paying jobs, they become more interested and they want to enter into the workforce. So a lot of the heartbeats that you're talking about, their stories as to why the employment rate is so high in those demographics. They're just taking a stand and saying we're not taking it anymore. So thank you for the work that you do. I'm actually looking forward and hoping that we get to work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And I think that's also why both of these partners and Rural List really tries to emphasize quality jobs.
Mhm.
So I know yesterday you were talking about McDonald's on the stage and how that was a job and not a career. Like you're not going to stay in it. I remember the exact term because I've recently read about this, but you're like, you're not going to stay in that job for 2 years. In fact, McDonald's standard turnover rate is every 60 days. So I think that's why we really try to invest in career pathways that are going to lead to an incumbent worker track, that are going to pay you a livable wage, that are going to offer you benefits, that are going to offer you childcare. And again, it's nothing to say that, retail, hotel, accommodation aren't great stepping stones and great opportunities for you to learn work skills. But as you said, like, we have to think beyond the box, especially when we're looking at BIPOC populations of how we're going to equitably redevelop this economy. And what are the positions that we can actually put people in that are going to lead to community wealth and asset building? Any others? If not, I think it's a good time to maybe stand up, refresh your coffee as we sort of transition to our next speakers. So feel free to liven up, go get a little bit more coffee and a Diet Pepsi. Thank you, guys.
Kathleen. Yeah. Okay. We actually sent one of our organizations, I used to be part of Pathfinder Services. We sent one of our.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm going to encourage everyone to take their seats so we can move on to our next session. Coming up. Grab your cup of coffee, some eggs and muffins on the side. All right, I'm going to actually invite Matt Joseph, who is our Senior Vice President of Policy, up onto the stage to introduce our next session.
You guys come on, take your seats. Oh, thank you all so much. I really appreciate the outpouring of support this morning. Matt Joseph, Senior Vice President Policy. Saw a lot of you yesterday. It's great to be back this morning. For this next panel, we're going to be joined by Don Cravens, the Undersecretary of Commerce for the Minority Business Development Agency, and Steve Hall, LISC's National Director of the Entrepreneurs of Color Fund and the Vice President of our Small Business and Economic Development Lending here at LISC. So Undersecretary Don Cravens serves really in the historic role as the first ever Undersecretary of Commerce for Minority Business Development. He was unanimously confirmed by the Senate in August, and in his current role, he also serves as the head of the Minority Business Development Agency, which we'll call MBDA, and in service of 9.7 million minority business enterprises. He holds a BA in political science from Louisiana State. I know we got some Louisiana people in this crowd. There it is. And he was elected official to the Louisiana House of Representatives and into the Louisiana State Senate. While in the legislature, he represented hundreds of businesses. Many were minority owned and many located in rural communities. Following Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, he served as a voice and champion for business owners, assisting with navigating the challenges related to recovery and rebuilding. In January of 2009, he left the legislature to serve as a staff director and chief counsel for the United States Senate Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship. And in 2013, he became chief of staff to United States Senator Mary Landrieu of Louisiana. At the time, the only African-American chief of staff in the United States Senate. And since leaving the Senate, Mr. Cravens has served in key executive positions for some of America's largest nonprofit and for-profit corporations, including the National Urban League, where he served as the executive vice president and chief operating officer. And in addition to serving as the undersecretary, Mr. Cravens is a United States Army Major in the District of Columbia Army National Guard Judge Advocate General Corps. Pretty impressive. And then there's Steve. Steve's at LISC. No, Steve's our Vice President of Small Business and Economic Development Funding and the National Director of LISC's Entrepreneurs of Color Fund, which we'll learn a little more about. In this capacity, he coordinates the ECOF's work with small and mid-sized businesses, government agencies, and community development organizations. He directs efforts that help fund the capital of small business owners. And additionally, he works to recruit the financial industry, local banking, philanthropic, and CDFI partners, and provides TA to help entrepreneurs and lenders succeed in the effort to grow and build wealth and fortify their communities. He brings more than 20 years of small business lending, banking, and community development experience to LISC. He previously served at Axion Chicago and Charter One Bank before joining LISC. So if you all can please join me in welcoming both Steve and Undersecretary Cravens.
Thank you, man.
All right. Well, Matt, thank you for the introduction. I didn't expect anything less, but Don, it's an honor and a pleasure to
Thank
be
you.
sitting with you today and having the opportunity to talk to the countless attendees at the conference in person and virtually, but really to talk about workforce and small business development, which I know is core to MBDA. Given the close relationship between small business and high quality jobs, it is extremely critical that we foster a more equitable economy, not just in urban communities, but in rural as well. As Matt mentioned at LISC, I lead our small business lending and spearhead the Entrepreneurial Color Fund initiative, which is deployed $164 million to entrepreneurs of color all over the country. We also are excited to, find opportunities to not only help businesses, grow and thrive, but weather, pandemics, endemics, and any other challenges that are on the horizon. And we think we can do that, creatively by working with great organizations like MBDA and, foster a spirit of, partnership and collaboration. So with that, I am honored to be with you today and just had a few questions for you, if you don't mind.
Well, Steve, let me just thank you. It's an honor to be here with you as well. And I want to thank Matt and your entire leadership. I want to thank the leaders, but I also want to thank the men and women who get the job done in the communities. I'm very familiar with LISC. I've been familiar with LISC when I was in government. I became more familiar with LISC when I was at the National Urban League. We worked together on a lot of places, competed together in a good way in a lot of places as well to do some of this intentional work. And of course, very familiar with what you're all doing, not only in the urban area, but what is really true to my heart, which is in the rural America as well, where a lot of people of color are sometimes forgotten about, not mentioned. And so it is so good to be here this morning with family and to be here with people who I know care about the same issues that I have cared about throughout my career. And I'm just looking forward to having this discussion with you. And I'm hoping that it's the beginning of a discussion with MBDA and LISC, and that we will continue this discussion and do some good together.
Well, I like that. I mean, I think everybody in here does too. So as Matt mentioned, MBDA has been permanently authorized, and Undersecretary Cravens, you have a historic role being the first ever Undersecretary for Commerce in this role. Can you share about the agency's history and mission that led to this historic moment?
Sure. So the Minority Business Development Agency was created in 1969 by President Nixon. And at the time, I think it was in response to the civil rights movement. African Americans and others in our great nation were kind of like where we are now. We're at an inflection point, and they were demanding and asking for the same basic rights that all Americans want. And a lot of those rights focused on social justice and civil rights. But there were a group of men and women who also believed in economic rights and this equity in our entrepreneurship. And so President Nixon, in response to that, a lot of folks in his leadership created the Office of Minority Business Enterprise, I think is what it was called at that point. And the agency has succeeded and meandered at times for 53 years. And the men and women of MBDA who worked in this temporary agency, this temporary idea for 53 years, didn't know if the next president would keep the agency. They didn't know if the next Congress would fund the agency. But in 2021, in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, Congress, both Republicans and Democrats, came together and passed the Minority Business Development Act. And President Biden signed the act into existence. What the act does is really three major things. And I've never had a better job description in my life because the act is about 80 pages and it lays out what the Minority Business Development Agency is supposed to do in 2022 and 3 and on. First, it created an undersecretary position. Now, Steve, the importance of that is government titles, you know, they're very nuanced at times, but there's a secretary at the Department of Commerce, there's a deputy secretary, and right underneath that deputy secretary level are the undersecretaries, above the assistant secretary level. What that means is I sit at the same table with the gentleman who runs NOAA. I sit at the same table with the gentleman who runs the census, the woman who runs the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. And so MBDA is no longer at the kiddie table at the discussions about chips and broadband. MBDA is no longer in a temporary folding chair. I am in all of those discussions. And in all of those discussions, just like the work you do, I am talking about how do we make sure that this work we're doing, we're building semiconductors, we're extending broadband to communities all over the place, we're building up our infrastructure. How will it impact minority business entrepreneurs, minority business enterprises? Because we know that our country is stronger if everybody's stronger, right? And so I'm at that table. So that's what the act did. The first thing, it created an undersecretary position. Matt talked about the fact that was unanimously confirmed, honored that this Senate could agree on me unanimously. I wish I could take the credit. I do at home, man. I tell my wife it's because I'm such a great guy. But I think the reason I was unanimously confirmed is I think, again, Republicans and Democrats agreed we needed this agency, we needed a leader. And so I think it had more to do about that than about me. The other thing the act says is we want MBDA to not only be intentional in urban areas, but we want you to be intentional in rural areas. And so the act mandates that MBDA create rural business centers. And in order to do that, we have to partner with minority serving institutions like HBCUs and Hispanic serving institutions. And so when we receive our funding, which we hope Congress will do that soon, I can't wait to work with you all on how we can expand our reach to rural America and rural minority businesses. And then one of the last big parts of the act, it says, we want MBDA to be the clearinghouse of all things related to minority businesses. We want you to be the voice of minority business in this country. And so I have the best job in a certain way, in many ways in government. I've got one mission every day when I wake up. I get to go to the Department of Commerce. I get to make good trouble. I get to make good trouble, whether it be people in my political party or not, because I'm a voice, not a puppet. I can be unapologetic about I am here to make sure that people of color who want to achieve the American dream, who want to pull themselves up by the bootstraps, get some boots and get some straps. And I know that's what LISC has been working on, to do the same leveraging in communities all across this great land. And that was what MBDA was created to do, but we were temporary. And it's hard as a temporary agency to impact systemic change. We are temporary no more. And so what I tell people is, you know, in the minority community, we've been hearing for so long, help is on the way, help is on the way. It's like Charlie Brown in the football, or a good but terrible episode of Good Times. We've been waiting to get out. Help is no longer, I mean, lighten up, folks. We came here we got to have fun too in this work. Help is no longer on the way when it comes to MBDA. Help is here and it's here to stay.
I love it. I love it. You know, I really like the good trouble, the necessary trouble, the trouble that we're all engaged in as partners here today. You know, with that in mind, the financing challenges that, you know, minority businesses have are pervasive. And regardless if they're Hispanic, Indigenous, Black, they go to institutions across the country and, you know, they may not feel as welcome. And I think it's more, you know, prominent in rural communities because there are, you know, less minority-led institutions that could, you know, in turn make those loans, or even CDFIs for that matter. What is the role of, how would you like to see MBDA, you know, help, you know, foster a community of access to capital in rural communities?
I grew up in a rural community in the Deep South in Louisiana. My parents are African-American entrepreneurs and have been for 40 years. They've had several entrepreneurial endeavors, as many entrepreneurs will. But the one that has been the most successful, Steve, is we have an insurance agency, the Don Craven's Insurance Agency, which has been around almost as long as I have. And I've watched my parents struggle with that business. I watched my parents I was at the dinner table when we didn't know if we could make ends meet. We didn't know if Miss So-and-so was going to have to get her paycheck maybe a couple of weeks late because we were having a tough time with receipts and didn't have the resources, didn't have, I remember the times my parents were trying to access capital and that capital just wasn't there for them unless they were willing to put the house and all of their wealth on the line. And so when you ask me what it is that I'd like to see for people of color, what I'd like to see for all Americans, but what I'd like to see for people of color that I think has been held back is that opportunity to just be treated equitably so that they really can have the opportunity to achieve the American dream, so that people on one side of the railroad tracks, their businesses are considered to be as safe and as qualitative and as good as businesses on the other side of the business. An Asian American owned business that's not vandalized because people should rather wash their hands to prevent getting COVID rather than vandalizing Asian Americans. I'd like to see a place where Hispanic owned business can go in with the same specifications as a white owned business and be given the same chance. I think that is what MBDA's mission has to be. I know that is what LISC works on each and every day. We are at a point in our nation's history, ladies and gentlemen, and brothers and sisters, that if we don't deal with this equity, these equitable issues, we're going to regret it for the rest of our lives. And I'm going to say that for two reasons. We saw it during George Floyd. I'm a Gen Xer. We're the quiet generation. We're sandwiched between the baby boomers, the Gen Xers, and the Gen Zers. My mom and my daughters do more social media than I do, right? I was a latchkey Michael J. Fox kid. And I'm sitting there going, my mom and my daughter are out tweeting and social media and me. But we saw it as Gen Xers when we were sitting at those tables during the pandemic, because we were all stuck at home together. When we watched Black and white kids and kids of all makes and models marching on our streets who were saying in many instances, Mom and Dad, good enough is just not good enough for us. We saw in this recent election that young people are voting, unlike a lot of our when we were young generations, it took us time to get used to voting, not these kids. They're voting now. And I think what they're saying to us is you all better get it right. You should get it right, and you better get it right. And we need to get it right. We need to get it right. And so right now we've got $1.2 trillion that Congress, bipartisan Congress, has said we need to invest in our own communities. Rather than just investing in foreign lands, we rebuilt Europe after World War II with the Marshall Plan. Let's have a domestic Marshall Plan. Let's invest in our America, in our streets. That money is there. Now, how do we make sure that everybody has a fair chance to participate in the building of our country? It will create generational wealth. It will break down systemic barriers. It'll make people feel more invested in their communities because they'll say, we were part of this. That is what LISC, MBDA, this country, I think, has to do in order to create that ecosystem. You asked me, that I remember your question, is how do we make sure things change? That is how we have to make sure that things change. I never saw this coming. And here we are, thank God. Now let's do something with it.
I love it. I also love all the Gen X quotes. So I'm gonna just, drop some good times and
yes,
you
didn't think you were gonna get good times while you were here for the conference.
Michael J. Fox and
I know. I'm talking about
some of y'all going, what are they talking about?
What is he talking about? I got a Beverly Hillbilly coming up at some point too.
Hey,
just give me some time to work it in.
I use my Beverly Hills Spirit code all the time. I'm a retirement banker, so I'm always trying to, keep cash. So, right. So, I know we're like alienating some of y'all, but I don't watch TV now. So
we don't have time.
So Don, something that's historic, and I've been in the small business lending space for over 20 years, and I have led groups and used one of the best tools that the government had for the longest time, and it was the Small Business Administration. And whether it was the 7A program, the 504 program, it was a catalyst to help small businesses that were kind of not ready for traditional bank debt at that particular time. The unfortunate thing, and one of the reasons why I wanted to move from the banking space into the CDFI space, is minorities were left out of SBA lending. And the SBA, it wasn't intentional, but sometimes you create underwriting guidelines that have unintended consequences. And you make it not possible for the people who you want to impact to get access to those tools. With this historic announcement of the $100 million, that was invested from Treasury for the SSBCI to MBDA, what are your plans for that capital? How would you
Yes.
like to use that capital?
Great question. So let me say this, I'm a big fan of the Small Business Administration. And when I worked on Capitol Hill for Senator Landrieu, she chaired the Small Business Committee. I got an opportunity to really work with the great folks who work hard every day at SBA. And they've got a very expansive and wonderful mission. They help small businesses and entrepreneurs at all levels. And they also do disaster relief and all of those things. And so Administrator Guzman and her team do a phenomenal job there. However, what we know is that even those loan programs that were designed for people who are hard to reach, still, if you look at the numbers, have not been good for minority business owners. And so we know we have to do more. And LISC is the perfect intermediary because that is what you have been doing. You have the perfect model. You partner with the biggest institutions in this land, as well as our biggest government partners, and you find a way to intentionally bring it to people who need the help. You have built a phenomenal model on equity that we can duplicate and duplicate and duplicate. And I'm going to come back to where I'm going to need your help.
All right.
Let me go to the State Small Business Credit Initiative. This is such a big deal for MBDA. Remember, we just finally became a real person in this codification. Treasury has come to us and said, we're going to give you $100 million MBDA because we need some entity to help us make minority business enterprises more private equity, private capital ready. And we think you are the agency to help do that. So very soon, we are going to be launching this program, this MBDA Capital Readiness Program. I want this to be my legacy. In addition to building the agency and hiring a bunch of great folks to come and work, we're hiring, not trying to steal any of your folks, but if you know anybody who's looking to do minority business work, we are hiring up, we're building. But we are going to grant out this $100 million to entities that either have incubators or accelerators to provide technical assistance, which you all do very well. You all do very well, to provide technical assistance to entrepreneurs. Now, I think the intent is we want to get people who could do some of this infrastructure work. So I think what we're looking for, not that we won't take the mom and pops or people who are just getting started, but I think the idea is we're at that point. And we don't want anyone to feel like, you know what, if I just would have had a little bit more help, maybe I could have participated in this infrastructure. Maybe I could have participated in the climate work. Maybe I could have participated in the transportation work. And so the idea is Treasury is saying to MBDA, help us get folks scaled up and ready to go so that when things hit their states, they hit their communities, procurement opportunities, supplier diversity opportunities in big America, they'll be ready to go. We are going to be looking for people who can help us do that, to provide that technical assistance. Now, LISC could absolutely be a part of that. And so you all should look at those opportunities. Where I'm also going to need groups like LISC is when those people graduate, and this is an issue you all have to always worry about, Steve and Matt and team, when they graduate, as we know, that doesn't always mean corporate, that doesn't always mean that equity is open to those folks.
Yep.
That is a difficult discussion we still have to have on the back end. So for me, as your Undersecretary of Minority Businesses, I'm looking at this as three-pronged. One, let's create a program that institutions and organizations will want to become a grantee in, will want to do the technical assistance. Second, let's create a program that people in all areas of America, minority businesses will want to participate, go get the help. But thirdly, when we do all of that, when government steps up to the plate, when institutions like LISC or incubators and accelerators step up to the plate, when people pull themselves out of their homes and they go get help, who is going to be there for them to talk to? What bank will open its door? What equity fund will say, we'll do this work, we'll fund this? There were a lot of commitments made after George Floyd. Billions of dollars of commitment. Now, what I heard people say, I was at the Urban League at the time, we're committed, I just wish we could find people to invest in. LISC provides a lot of people to invest in. And I believe with the State Small Business Credit Initiative funding, we will find some additional people for people to invest in. I want us all as good stewards to give the technical assistance, participate in the program, and then we need our corporate partners to step up so that we can invest in America. we have an economy, and the president talks about this all the time, where there's still so many people locked out. It's not the best economy America can have. It's like going to the Olympics and still competing with just half a country because some people aren't allowed to participate for whatever reason. That is still how our economy functions. Just think about how competitive we'd be with our American ingenuity, our American innovation, if we were allowing more and more women and people of color to get patents and trademarks. Just think about how more competitive we'd be if we talked about entrepreneurship and innovation in elementary school. We wouldn't lose some of those kids. And so got a lot of plans, sir.
I like those plans. I mean, this is like the wrong panel for the people online. They're like, they want to be in the room. I can feel it.
And hello to all the people online. I mean, one of the benefits, and sometimes when I'm watching these programs online, I feel left out. But to the people online, I'm speaking to you too. You're missing a great crowd and you're missing great people, but we're speaking to you too. We appreciate everything they're doing in their communities as well.
You know, you brought it up. So as long as you talk about it, I'm gonna bring it into the conversation. There was a number of organizations who made George Floyd commitments. And one of the, biggest challenge for a corporation is finding the right partner.
Yep.
And I want to say our rural network with some fantastic partners, but, I want Kate, stand up so, people can see. Yeah, because, that was for the people online.
Yes.
There's power in collaboration. And I think one of the things that's hard is like people want to tell a George Floyd story by yourself. You can't tell it by yourself. You have to bring in partners to do it, because in 2022, by feedback from our partners, we launched, 2 major supplier diversity initiatives. We had to get minority-led businesses ready to take advantage of those opportunities because, the company said they were looking. We said, okay, if you're looking, we want you to double down on investing in what that means, like help bridge the gap for the deficiencies that they have so we can help them get access to these opportunities. I know historically MBDA has always been focused in the supplier diversity space because it was a natural fit between, great government procurement and corporate procurement. What are your thoughts on supplier diversity going forward? How should, this collaborative or this collective help, minority businesses, take advantage of supplier diversity opportunities?
Well, look, supplier diversity opportunities, procurement opportunities we do know when they're worked well and their goals in place and people are intentional, it builds wealth. We see that here in this region. We look at counties like Prince George's County, which have become examples of pockets of Black wealth because many of those African Americans who lived in that county worked in the government, retired from the government or saw opportunities in the government, left the government, but then did work with the government, did procurement with the government. Then after they did procurement with the government, they were able to do work with major corporations. So we know if given a chance, if given an opportunity, people can be successful. And that is what supplier diversity means for me. Where the disconnect has been, and you talked about this, Steve, is that you got to help people get there. And so sometimes it's not enough for a company or the government to say, love to do it, you're just not ready yet. Yeah. That's the boots and the straps that I continue to talk about. The great Whitney Young always talked about, well, sometimes you got to go an extra step. That's what equity is meeting people where they are, helping them build up, and then you don't have to do it again. And then they become a disciple, and maybe they can go help the next company. And so what we've been doing at MBDA, to answer your question, is we provided several $1 million in October to 26 of our business centers. We've got 88 business centers all across America that do great work in equities and grant programs. 26 of them, we gave them additional money so they could hire procurement specialists. Because again, we know that with the infrastructure money that's going to be rolling down, people are going to need help with procurement. The other thing we did recently, about a year ago, is we created a federal procurement center here in Washington, D.C. Oh, wow. So there are people who are watching, or there are people who are here who have an interest in doing federal procurement. Go to our website, mbda.gov. We have a center, a business center, that is purely designed to help people get into the federal procurement game. Oh, wow. It's the quickest way, I think, or one of the best ways to scale up a business. But as you know, in order to even get to a place to do procurement, supply diversity, that means you probably had some capital along the way. Yep. You had some coaching along the way. You had a network along the way. And so we got to get more businesses at that point where they can do supplier diversity, they can do procurement.
I love it. I love it. we've been talking in this context as if we didn't have this, historic, past 2 years, 2.5 years, where we've kind of gone through the pandemic. And, these Black and brown businesses were highly impacted, by the pandemic. And, fortunately, actually, a lot of them got cut out of great, federal programs like PPP and EIDL. That withstanding, what lessons were learned by you, by the agency, or what to do, if we have another, crisis like that?
Well, great point. And when the pandemic hit, to your point, Steve, as you mentioned, a lot of businesses, all businesses were hurt, right? Small businesses were very impacted. What we know is businesses of color were disproportionately impacted because a lot of people of color don't have a nest egg that they were able to rely on, or family money that, hey, look, I'll keep you afloat. And we saw our Asian businesses had to shut down because people were some people were ignorant enough to believe that they'd get COVID from going to eating Chinese food. I was upset because my Chinese restaurant was shut down. I was disappointed. I was disappointed in my country. And I was sad for my neighbors who own the restaurant, my Asian American neighbors who own the restaurants. And so it had a very chilling effect on our economy. It had a very chilling effect on business. What MBDA did during that time is, and thanks to the president and the Congress, there were emergency measures that MBDA was able to take advantage of. There was $37 million in the CARES Act, and that went to our business centers. And so what it allowed MBDA to do was to expand its services to more and more businesses, to try to help people bridge the gap, make it to the next pay period. There was $10 million for emergency grants, and that went to 30 MBDA business centers. And then there was an additional 25 million more for minority business enterprises to seek government assistance and services. And so government did step up to help businesses bridge the gap. As we know, some did, and unfortunately some didn't. Right. What I'd like to see is some of the ones who couldn't or didn't, I'd love to see those people get their businesses back, get back up and running again. And so again, as we've come through, we're a resilient country. We're a resilient people. We made it through. I'd like to see those people who lost their businesses come back. I'd like to see the people who took a hit, but were able to stay open, get strong.
I love it. I love it. I'm going to open it up for questions from the audience in a second.
Okay.
But, where's Jessie? Would Jessie, oh, there she goes. She knows when I get this opportunity, I looked at people's LinkedIn backgrounds and I get excited about what schools they attended. Now,
okay.
I saw you at LSU Tiger, but you also went to law school at
the Southern University Law Center, Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
Yeah, see, I was going to ask you about that. So I'm a proud HBCU graduate.
Okay.
And Florida A&M, if anybody's asking.
Great school.
But what type of opportunities is MBDA doing specifically with, HBCUs? You had brought it up earlier.
Yeah, great question.
Hispanic serving institutions.
So one of the fun parts of my job is we know that if we can start young people in entrepreneurship at early ages, that's good for all of us. And so one of the things we did just recently, we gave 6 entrepreneurship grants to 6 minority serving institutions. One went to Southern University. It was given before I got there. It was given before I got there. I got to cut the ribbon, but I had nothing to do with it. But we also had Bowie State. We have a Shaw University. We had one of our great colleges in Puerto Rico that I got a chance to visit, Sacred Heart University. And so I'd like to see more of that. What Congress did put in the legislation, which I think is brilliant, is it says even with our rural centers, you have to do them in conjunction with minority serving institutions. I think Congress understands that as we build this minority entrepreneurship space, it's going to be the next generation. That's what these young people want. They don't want to work for a business. Many of them want to build a business. And so we're being very, very intentional, Steve, to make sure that we engage our young people early in life on entrepreneurial issues. One of the things I'd like to see us do that's not in the act. And so people say, well, what would you change? Where Congress was quieter than I'd like is really young entrepreneurs. It talks about HBCUs and minority serving institutions. I don't know, but folks weren't, I think, thinking we got to hit these young people when they're very young, right? So they can be thinking about their great ideas. So if they do want to get a patent or a trademark, or they need those things, or capital, they're thinking about it at 12 and 13, not at, a lot of our kids don't make it to college.
That's true.
right? A lot of our kids don't make it to that wonderful HBCU or that wonderful Hispanic serving institution or Asian serving institution. And so I want to catch them as quickly and as early as we can. Again, this is the kind of work you all can do because you're in those communities and you can do it. We'd love to partner with you to do it.
Don, I'm hogging all the questions.
There have been good questions though.
And I won't do any Gen X references because somebody else may have something good in the audience.
All right.
So,
Okay. All right. Let's see.
Julianne.
Hi, I'm Julianne. I'm representing the virtual community. We've had quite a few emojis, a very big popular component of the virtual. People really like what you're saying. And a few comments. A quick question. Could you share the DC procurement website again?
You go to our website, mbda.gov, Minority Business Development Agency.gov. And I'm sure if you just do MBDA Federal Procurement Center, you can absolutely get straight to the procurement center. It's located here in DC, and if it should be very easy to find.
And another comment from Sylvia Brown, who's in Hempstead County, which if you've ever visited, Old Washington, or very close to the diamond mine, if you ever want to pick up a diamond. Her comment is great to hear about the requirement for MBDAs in rural. However, some minorities are in predominantly white areas, especially when you talk about rural.
Yeah.
Consider mobile intake centers, satellite offices, model the SBA Navigator, but a requirement that a minority outreach firm is in the contract. And is that part of the work?
Great question. One of the other components of the act, which I didn't mention, is Congress is saying to MBDA that we have to have regional offices. So we had regional offices. Sometimes MBDA has had regional offices because we were temporary. If funding wasn't there, the regional offices closed down. And so the regional offices closed down during President Obama's administration. Congress says, MBDA, you need to get your offices back. And it's because of that. It's going to help touch states where we maybe don't have an equity, our business center, but it'll also help people who maybe just are falling through the cracks. Just like other government agencies, we need to have presence throughout the country. Interestingly enough, just throwing this out there, 52% of minority business enterprises are in the Southeast, which makes sense. But even as we think about building, the person said, even as we think about building a regional office, one of the things I have to consider, and again, would love input from people on, is I want to make sure that I'm apportioning the resources where they need to be too. So yes, great to have a regional office in a place where there may not be a huge minority community, but there are folks, they need to have access. But I also want to make sure that in the larger areas where there are a whole bunch of MBEs, that they have enough personnel, resources, so that we're addressing that as too. So what's exciting is I'm getting to build all of these things in 2023.
Wow.
And not in 1963, when we thought it was always just bricks and mortar and you didn't have an internet. And if you wanted to get to people, they had to come to you. We can build smarter, cheaper, more intentional with technology, with data. And so I'm challenging my team to let's come up with a new model. Maybe we create a new model of what a regional office looks like. Maybe we create a new model of what a rural business center looks like, because I can't be in every rural community. We know that. So what does that look like? Is it a center of excellence? Is it a place people go? So I'm excited. It's a big challenge, but I am very excited. And we're looking for some great people who want to come in and help us do that.
Hello, my name's Kenneth Korn. I'm the State Director of Rural Development in Oklahoma.
Very good.
And one of the things I wanted to ask a question is about, in Oklahoma, we have 13 historic Black communities that I've been trying to work with. Many of these communities have been overlooked for decades. Their infrastructure is in disrepair mostly, but there's no economic base in these communities. So they've been coming to rural development, and we've been spending a lot of time trying to figure out how we rebuild their infrastructure, but they also want to talk about how we rebuild some economic activity in those communities. I guess my question is, what's the best way, rural development? Because I'm one of the few, I think, that think along the lines that we're not always the best fit to help them with some things, but there are other federal partners we should reach out to. So in your perspective, what's the best way that we at Rural Development can partner with you to help maybe start getting them on the path where they can make their community vibrant and economically sustainable again?
Wonderful question. I want you to do with me what your counterpart in Louisiana is doing with me. I want to meet with you. I want to bring in your regional SBA director, and I want us to sit down and figure that question out together. I do think rural development plays a huge part, or can play a huge part in those types of communities. And I want to thank you for the work. USDA has got to be a part of that of the discussion, and so I think with USDA, SBA, MBDA, let us figure some of that out, a strategy, and then we'll find the other government partners that we can bring in, corporate partners that we can bring in. Liz can help play a role in that. I'd love to work with you on that. That is what we're doing in my home state of Louisiana, because I know a lot of the actors, the SBA and we've got HBCUs there, and we just would have to identify some of the resources in Oklahoma, maybe some of your native resources or some of the other, and let's figure out how we get it done. I would love to work with you in any state. USDA is a big part of that. It has to be, and I'm committed. I think the three of us starting, the SBA, the MBDA, and the USDA, we can absolutely put a plan. We have to put a plan together. Then we bring in transportation, we bring in energy, we bring in some of the other agencies. Next week in Louisiana, I'll be attending an event very much like that, where we're bringing in the Department of Transportation, we're bringing in NTIA that's going to be building the broadband throughout this community. A lot of, Mr. Director, a lot of our issue is we just don't know until we talk and know. So I would say to you, let's talk about it. Let's figure it out. Let's come up with a strategy. What are we missing? And then let's put a plan together. I would love to work with you on that. Please.
Go ahead, Matt.
All right, thank you, Steve. I appreciate that. I have a few questions.
Okay.
I want to ask. I know we still have some good time. So hopefully I'll get to these. You'll get a chance to answer them all, I think. But most instructive for this group, the rural business development centers we've been talking about. I think the statute did say to set these up in conjunction with the HBCUs. Can you unpack that a little more? What's that going to look like? And I know also, I think we mentioned at the beginning, your kind of authorization level for your program is over 100 million, but historically you've gotten what, like 40 or 50 million. So can you get some of these launched without the funding? How does all that going to play out?
Great question, Matt. And so you're right. Let me start by saying this. So we were told by Congress we should have these rural business centers, and I'm excited about that as a rural boy. The act also says for MBDA, in order to build the regional centers that Julianne asked me about, in order for you to build the rural centers, in order for you to keep your existing programs going, you should receive $110 million in appropriation. In government land, that's not a lot of money, right? When you compare it to much larger agencies, but it'd be a lot of money for MBDA because we've never had that much before. If we get the 110, then we can do all of those things that the act tells us we have to do. If we don't get the 110, and it looks like we may not get the whole 110, then I'm gonna get to your question, which is, then what do you do? My desire is we figure out a way to still build some presence in rural America. Now, let me. My business centers that are already there are probably, if they're watching, they're upset with me because they're saying we already do rural work. Many of our centers are located in urban America, but if anyone calls them from anywhere in America, not even in their state, they will help those people. And so I want to say, we think we do rural work already. I think when you think about things, though, where people are located and you look at our map, it looks like we're just in big cities. And so I think we can still design a rural business center initiative, a rural business center plan with technology that even if we didn't receive the full funding, which I still hope we can get, my members of Congress are watching, we can still find a way to have some impact. And so that is what I was saying earlier, where we got to find a way. And so right now we're just, I'm aggressively talking to members of Congress and saying, hey, you all wanted us to be here. Thank you. Fund us so we can do all of these great things that you said you want us to do in the act. If we don't get all of the funding, well, Matt, we'll find a way. My answer will not be to you next year when we're here, well, we didn't do it because we didn't get the funding. That's never the answer. My answer will be, we would have liked to have built 10, but we built 3 because that's what I was funded to do. And those 3 are working well and we're learning lessons. And so when I go back to Congress to get the funding for the other ones, we already got a great plan. So we're going to make it work. We're going to make it work.
Until someone takes me away from this mic. You have some online questions too? So okay, great. We'll get Just a real quick clarification on the $100 million that you can deploy for the support the SSBCI.
Yes.
Is there going to be opportunities for third parties outside of the MBDA network
Yes.
to come in? There will be because
Absolutely. Yes. No, let me flip. And so that 100 million that we receive from Treasury is a separate 100 million from the 110 I was just talking about in the budget. That would be to run the MBDA. This 100 million is coming from Treasury, from the State Small Business Credit Initiative, which was part of the American Rescue Plan. That is a totally different grant program. And yes, other businesses, nonprofits, universities can apply for the grant program once it's launched. And so it will not be just MBDA networks. We're looking for people who, again, who can incubate a business, who can accelerate a business, who can provide technical assistance. We want to get people capital ready. And so, yeah, existing network people, MBDA people can apply for it, but others can absolutely. It's going to be an open competition. And so as soon as it's listed and put out, made public, I'm going to make sure that our friends everywhere know about it, because we want to get this money into the hands of people who know how to do this work, so you can start helping Americans all across this great land to get to make them more attractive to private equity. That is the intention. We want to make people more attractive to private equity. We also know once we do that, or while we're doing that, we got to go to private equity and say, you got to come to the table too. We got some great businesses who are ready to roll, who are going to be ready to go. Get your checkbook out. Let's do some things. You made some commitments. Like, we're bringing folks to you. We can't force anybody to invest in a business. I get that. That's not what this is about. It's about making people more attractive, more ready, more confident, right? So that private equity would want to invest in them, or somebody would want to invest in them. We want the free market to work for them. Please, Julianne.
Sorry. A comment from Don. I love the comments. Oh, it's a question. I love the comments about scaling up and preparing minority small businesses to gain access to capital, procurement, and diversity supply opportunities, which you've spoken at quite a bit. How can these efforts be implemented in the South, particularly South Carolina, where it's commonly stated that they're not ready to do this work? How can we increase national and federal investments in the South?
I think people have to be intentional. Look, I was in South Carolina recently, and I saw some readiness. Our business center there is run by a woman, Ms. Diane Sumter. I met with Republicans and Democrats. I met with representatives from both Congressman Clyburn's office as well as Senator Scott's office. I'm not saying that the person's wrong, but I did see some interest in working there. She's working very hard on EV charging stations. She's making the argument that people of color, we don't want to just see EVs roll by our neighborhoods. We want to build them and be invested in them and have charging stations, and not just have them put in our neighborhood, but to put them in our neighborhood. So I did see some intentionality, but to answer the question is, people are going to have to hold their state elected officials accountable for this money. A lot of the money is going from the national government, the federal government, to the state government. Yeah. And people have to go to their elected officials on both sides of the aisle and say, look, whether you would have voted for this or not, it's here. Whether or not you support the president or not, the money's here. How are we going to make our communities better? And how are we going to ensure that there's equity? And how are we going to make sure that people aren't forgotten? They're going to have to do that on a local level. The federal government is doing everything it can to bootstrap the requirements so that those things do happen on the state level. But at the end of the day, and I served in a state legislature, at the end of the day, the state's got to want to do right too. And so how do we do it in the South? We got to get it done. Our elected officials, we got to talk about it. We've got to demand it. It's taxpayer dollars. It's the right thing to do. It's going to be tough, but I think it can be done. I've been to Georgia. I've been to South Carolina. I've been to North Carolina. I've been to Louisiana. I'm making my way to this. I'm a Southern boy. I understand that politics is different in some places and that but I am hopeful, because I am hearing and seeing some good signs that even our elected officials who may be on a different side of the aisle as me are still saying, but this is a lot of money. We got to do something with it. People are going to demand better highway. People want broadband. People are going to demand, EVs are here. I hope we can embrace this opportunity.
I'm going to ask a question, because this is the one question I forgot to ask, that I think is really, really important. when you talk about minority business owners, you're also talking about, trust against, systems and infrastructure and not believing that these opportunities are for them. And that's a mindset. It's not,
That's right.
it's not a construct of government. It's just a historical fact.
That's right.
They've had to deal with that for years. Anything you think MBDA could do to, help the psychology of Hispanic and Indigenous and Asian and Black owners to know that this is something that's actually for them, that could benefit them, that will, be part of breaking down, some of those systematic barriers that have them believing, like in Carolina with that last question, that, government doesn't work for me.
Steve, they need people like me and people who work in government to restore their faith in government. We had a town hall yesterday at the Department of Commerce. And one of the questions, and I was the MC, I thought it was so great to be the MC as the new guy. I got to interview, like you're doing now, almost. I got to interview the secretary and the deputy secretary. I didn't realize I was being set up because I also had to ask the questions like you're doing, Julianne. So I had to ask all the hard questions. Like, whoa, I didn't know that we're going to ask her this in public. But one of the questions I asked the Secretary Raimondo, who's doing a phenomenal job, was people have lost faith in government and they doubt government. And how do we restore that faith? And her answer was very simple. It was basically, do your damn job. She didn't say it like that. But I am. If I do my damn job, if you all do your jobs, it's still the best thing we can do to restore people's faith in the system. That's true. We can get caught up in the Twitter sphere. We can get caught up in the social media. We can get caught up. We Gen Xers don't get caught up, but we can get caught up in it. But if we do our job, it's still the best evidence that things work. And so my job as Mr. Undersecretary is not to just enjoy the title and enjoy the fact that I get a nice little fancy nameplate. That is not why I took the pay cut or left a wonderful job at the National Urban League. I did it because I want to restore the faith. I want to bring some faith where there maybe hasn't been some faith. So I just need to do my doggone job. And I think if we do it, it's still the truth is still the best defense to people who doubt. And so government has to work. We have to make it work. Our country needs it to work. Our democracy is depending on us. And so how do we do it? We do our doggone jobs. I wake up every morning and I go talk to those people. I go say, look, I grew up in a family like yours. I understand we don't always believe it works, but you're just gonna have to trust us this time. It's gonna work. It's gotta work. We have to do our job. We have to be we have to tell the truth. We have to just work hard to make it happen. I don't know another way. Just posting something. I say this to people all the time. There's a lot of money that's flowing out there. And we go to these groups and communities. We talk about 1.2 trillion and I see people's eyes already kind of glossing over. It's a lot of money. I go, oh, I don't understand any of that stuff. And I stop the discussion and say, hey, everybody wake up. I know it's a lot. I know it's hard to talk about this billion for this and this billion for that, but you're gonna have to figure it out. So take a break, give 5, make us come back. Let me submit a 1-pager, go to the website. But ladies and gentlemen, we just can't let this one slip by. We can't complain for generations that when are we ever gonna invest in us? When are we ever gonna tackle broadband? When are we ever gonna invest in minority businesses? When are we gonna invest in rural communities? The money is there to do it. So let's do it. But shame on us if we just said, well, the government didn't do their job. Well, we had a responsibility and role to play in that too. I will tell you, I'm seeing good people in different government agencies that did a lot like me, who left private sector jobs and said, I think I want to do this for right now. I think I need to be here. I think I'm seeing you all being more intentional than ever. And you've always been intentional in this work, but I'm seeing you being more intentional. I'm seeing that people stayed during the last day on a Friday to hear even me talk about these issues. I see something is different. Something is different. We've got 5 to 10 years to make it happen. Ladies and gentlemen, let's make it happen. That's the best way we can restore people's confidence. You know, we don't teach civics like we Gen Xers learn.
Yep.
It's had an impact on our community. It's had an impact on our kids. I don't know that people understand a democracy and the local levels and all that. One way to bring it back, one way to restore that hope is to show them that it can work, and it does work. And we do live and work in what we think is the greatest experiment in this world's history. But guys, we got to step up and prove that to be true. There are a lot of people who are trying to prove it wrong for whatever reason. I don't know. I don't know why. It's not good for us and our kids, but I want to prove them wrong. I want to prove us right.
Okay, I just one more question on that. Sorry, just because it's been here longer. But Kenneth Cox from VGA CDC, which is Boys, Girls, Adults Community Development Center, and Marvel, which is in the Arkansas Delta. Arkansas is clearly showing up in the chat.
Great. From Arkansas.
If you want to come, we'll take you. We are classified as a small rural nonprofit organization. Although we are not considered a small business, we operate as one, and was negatively impacted when COVID struck the same way small businesses were. How can nonprofit organizations be included with receiving these benefits offered for small business owners when it comes to needing that external support to recuperate from the pandemic?
What I've been seeing is that a lot of the funding opportunities that we are preparing, we are including nonprofits in that. I think that's the other thing. I had an Uber driver ask me this week. We were stuck on the highway. I was trying to get to the airport. He says, "We've got to invest in this infrastructure." I said, "I promise you we are." He says, "Well, where's the money?" I said, "Well, we just passed the bill a year ago." A lot of what's not hold up, but what's taken some time is making sure that when we put it out, the right wording is used, the right entities are allowed to participate. So even with this 100 million that Matt continues to ask me about, the state small business credit. No, I'm glad he's asking me because we want people to look into it. We spent a lot of time on making sure the right people, types of organizations could participate. So you asked a wonderful question. The NOFO's not out, so I can't release a lot. But I think what you're going to see as government continues to put money out, maybe what their definition of who could do it in the past is expanding because we realize that, well, maybe it shouldn't just be not-for-profit. Maybe it should be for-profit, not-profit. It should be organizations. It should be institutions. It should be. And so I do think you're going to see more and more expansive definitions of who can provide help to people in America because we're realizing there are different types of groups out there who do great work. And so if you just limit it to one or two, or what we used to think was an organization, we're missing out, and we're missing out on some help. So that's what's taking a little time with getting some of the money out in infrastructure is we're trying to make sure we do it right. And not just post something and you say, well, look, if you'd have talked to us, you would have realized that's not who does this anymore, or that's not the only way to do it anymore. And so that's why it's taking a little time, but it's coming. It's past, it's done, it's coming. Are we ready for it? Let's use this time to get prepared. Let's use this time to build up some scale and get some folks ready and prepared. Let's use this time to talk to our elected officials in the South Carolinas and the other states where we want to make sure people are ready to do. That's fine. Let's go. Let's talk to our elected officials. If you heard me talk today, I was I'll brag about my president because he's made equity a #1 priority. He did it on day one and with his executive order. But you don't hear me talking a lot partisan stuff. The great thing about my job is what I have seen by and large in the minority business space. In the business space, it's a very bipartisan issue. And when I go to those states, some of those states that I think some folks say, well, how are you going to get that in this tough red state? When I talk to those members of Congress, they've been very receptive to the idea of MBDA. They authorized the bill. They passed the bill. I'm willing to work with both sides of the aisle when it comes to minority business enterprises. And I think we do have an opportunity. I know some of my colleagues wish they sometimes had that bipartisan support what they do. But right now, I've got champions on both sides of the aisle. When I go to Capitol Hill, I meet on both sides of the aisle. And what I am hearing from the Senator Wickers of the world, from Mississippi, we want some we got to help our rural businesses. What I'm hearing from Jack Reed in Rhode Island just last week, we don't have a business center in Rhode Island, but our minority community is growing. Where do they turn? So we are meeting with folks from both sides of the aisle. We're trying to make MBDA be the agency, the intentional agency it needs to be in states, whether they're blue, red, purple, red, green. We just see them as American states. And we see the minority businesses in that state as people who need help. And so we're going to I want to build an agency that can help them. And because of technology, I don't know if you have to be physically present in every state all the time. And so I got to figure out a way to do that. We're going to work on that. I've just been there 3 months. Give me a little time, but I promise you we're going to figure it out. And a bunch of smart young people working for me who are here with me today. We're going to figure out how do we become a modern day technical assistance agency that's based on equity.
Man, I love it. That's so powerful. I see all those people in the back of the room look like they want to come up here and take our seats, but
Okay.
One more question. Okay.
Don, I just really want to thank you so much
Thank you,
for
Caitlin.
your leadership and your vision. You're a true inspiration. And from the home
Thank
state of Louisiana, thank you very much. But this Gen Xer wants to go back to the future
Love
and
love
talk a little bit about procurement and systems barriers. So we're talking a lot about rural investment, rural opportunities, rural economies, very regional in nature, statewide, and also international. What we saw really coming out of COVID was this need to really ramp up e-commerce opportunities and also international global expansion opportunities.
Yes.
So my question for you is on the procurement side, we're talking a lot about the need to get businesses ready through government, various different government certifications, et cetera, whether it's at state and or federal level. But on the international side, how much is MBDA really looking to lean into international trade,
Great question.
especially for minority businesses that haven't been as present? on the
Great
stage?
question. And look, Caitlin, great to see you. I got a chance to work with her when she was our regional advocate for the SBA and did a phenomenal job. Liz is so fortunate. You plucking the best of our country, and it shows. Thank you so much for asking the question about exporting. Because with all of the other great things I talked to you about, the mission of MBDA, if you go to our website, it's for the growth and global competitiveness of minority businesses. And so the other thing I haven't even been able to really get to and to focus on is that global piece. Next week, President Biden is convening a meeting with multiple African nations. We're going to have a global African summit, and I'm going to be participating in that. I'm looking forward to for that reason. I agree with you. I think we have to do more to expand the reach. We know the world is getting smaller because of technology. It's easier to get our products and goods and services to people all over the country. And so I see that as an outgrowth of the supplier diversity you were talking about. If you're good enough to do business with Google, you're good enough to do business with the Department of Transportation, you're probably good enough to do business with Asia or Africa or Latin America. And so we have to be part of that too. We actually do have a couple of exporting centers at MBDA. I think we've got 4, if I'm not mistaken, 4. We've got 4 exporting centers across America as well. And so if you are a minority business and you want to do exporting, check us out. We've got 4 centers. And just because a center is located in Texas doesn't mean that if you're in Oklahoma, you can't call them. They will pick up the phone. Our centers are not geographically tied. Again, I think that's kind of an old thinking that if they're there, they only work for those people. No, they will help you out. Our exporting centers will help you out. We've got an advanced manufacturing center in Baltimore, I believe. They'll help you out if you're in advanced manufacturing. The story is this. If you got any questions about what we do, come to our website, check us out. I promise you, we've got a place that can help you. Our issue has been, we've just been small and kind of unknown for many, many years. My job is to help change that. And that's why I think Congress made us a codified statutory language agency, gave us an undersecretary rather than a director or an assistant secretary, because I think they said, well, let's get somebody with a loud mouth, a big mouth, who's willing to subject him and his family to Senate confirmation, but who will go out and brag about the good things that are going on at MBDA. And so I'm honored to be here. I am looking forward to working with all of you. I want this to be a continuing dialogue. I appreciate the work you're doing in your communities. I know you're doing God's work. I know you're doing it. It helps me wake up in the morning knowing that there are people like you all who are doing the work. That if I just didn't feel good today and I couldn't get out of bed because I was just not feeling well, I'm not alone. I want you all to know you're not alone either. We're here too. So thank you for this opportunity. And I look forward to seeing you all again.
And with that, this is the best fireside chat I've done all day.
All right. Me too. Me too.
Don, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
On behalf of Liz, our partners, we are truly thankful that you spent some time with us today, empowered us with the possibilities of partnering with MBDA and what it could look like. And we're truly thankful. And if you ever need anything from anybody in this room, feel free to reach out to Kate.
Very good. I will.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all. Thank you.
That was fantastic. Let's give another round of applause for Stephen Donald. All right, so we are coming up to the last panel of the day, and I'm going to bring some energy back in the room because I was asked to hype him up, and I always stand and deliver. So everyone else stand to your feet really quick for me. Get on your feet. Come on. Don't make me force. Everyone stand. All right. Are you ready? I just want you to put your hands on the table and give a little bit of a drum roll. Get it going. Get it going. There we go. Without further ado, LISC Director of Economic Development, Bill Taft.
All right, while we get teed up here, I'll get started. So we just keep this thing rolling. So again, I'm Bill Taft. It's great to be here. Kate, thanks for having me. It's a privilege to serve as the Senior Vice President for Economic Development for LISC. And I'm going to be leading a conversation here just in a few minutes with, we're really going to be talking about how over the last few years, we have seen a turn of many different kinds of organizations towards serving entrepreneurs, and particularly entrepreneurs of color. And so I'm looking forward, as we get our technology set up here, of having a conversation with a few folks that are going to talk about that in their specific organizations. But maybe just tell a little story about what's been happening with LISC in this space while we do that. So LISC, I've been in this position about 5 years. This was a new position, Senior Vice President for Economic Development, that really tried to consolidate national support for our local urban and rural work around supporting 3 things. And these 3 things are really around people and helping people upskill and connect to job pathways and build their individual wealth. And as a key strategy, we do that, as I think you all know, through a Financial Opportunity Center network, both urban and rural. So thanks all of you in the room and online that are doing that work. Really important. Also looking at supporting small businesses. And this is really what we're going to be focusing on today, but then landed in specific places. And we call these marketplaces that are communities where it might be downtowns in rural areas, might be industrial areas, or places that are a blend of commercial and industrial. And so, and the idea is to take the small business work and the FOC work and our network of business development organizations that are growing that we'll talk about a little bit more later, and focus those on communities that have been historically disinvested. And that's the work that you all do in your communities around the country. Thank you for that work. Thank you for partnering with us on that work. So when the pandemic hit, LISC had really not done a lot of direct investment in small businesses. And we have, since that time, invested over $270 million directly in relief-related grants and relief-related work. And suddenly, this is a big piece of our efforts. We now have about 160 business development organization partners around the country. And those groups are community-based. Many of them are in your communities that are serving entrepreneurs. And now we have the ability to have these kind of conversations that we're going to have today, and to talk about how do we use that base of partnerships to actually have the kind of impact we just heard about from the Undersecretary, talking about the kinds of opportunity and needs that are out there, and particularly among entrepreneurs of color in our country. So I'm going to introduce, come on in guys, have a seat. So we have a great panel here that is going to be talking about this topic of entrepreneurship and what's been happening in the last few years in their space around serving entrepreneurs. First of all, we have Nathan Oley, who is the CEO of IEDC, which is the largest International Economic Development Council, the largest. How does it? Are you worldwide the largest economic development group? That's what I thought. Yeah. So it's the organization that's the longest standing mover of and organizer and supporter of the economic development space, and maybe not historically the first place people thought of with small business development, but that has changed a lot in the last few years. We're going to talk about that. We also have Dr. Matt Wagner, who is the chief program director for the National Main Street Center. I used to be a Main Street manager years ago, so I'm very excited about having Matt here on our conversation. Main Street, as I think particularly rural America knows, is a really powerful tool for revitalizing the downtowns of communities. And but maybe not necessarily always known in the past for specific focus on supporting entrepreneurship. And then also Matt Perkins, one of my fellow Lisker, who works for our safety and justice program, who leads our programming work there. And he's going to talk about how something that also you wouldn't think of necessarily focusing on entrepreneurship, which is safety and justice, and how that has really connected into this space. And again, I think the idea is that we really want to have this conversation focus on is how do we take all the different work that we do and have either the direct product or the byproduct of that work be advancing opportunities, particularly for people of color and entrepreneurs that are in places that have historically not been supported effectively. So that's going to be the nature of our conversation today. Let's go ahead and get started. Great. So Nathan, you want to talk a little bit more about just from a large scale, big organization, long time work in the economic development space, what's been going on as far as this movement towards entrepreneurship?
Well, first of all, thank you for letting me be a part of this, and thank you for all for sticking with us. The last panel on the last day of the conference is always a difficult spot to be in. But as they said, I'm Nathan Oley. I'm the president and CEO of the International Economic Development Council. It is a pivotal time for the IDC. I've been in this role for 10 months. My predecessor, Jeff Finkel, was there for 35 years. And for us, that means it's a pretty significant transformation for the organization and transition for the organization. The IDC has been around for more than 35 years in multiple versions, but as this agency, as this organization for the last 20 years. And we have always historically been focused on the economic development sphere kind of writ large. And how do we help both build professional development opportunities for individuals in the economic development world, but also for organizations? How do we train people and organizations to be doing really good work in economic development? How do we bring people together? How do we convene? How do we share resources, share tools, share ideas? But especially over the last 3 years, the organization has really dove into work around entrepreneurship, around small business growth, and around driving more equitable economic outcomes for communities of all sizes. I come from a background both at the state and federal level in economic development. For the last 4.5 years, I ran an organization called the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, where we work exclusively in rural and tribal areas across the country around a whole host of issues: entrepreneurship and economic development, access to safe drinking water, sanitary wastewater, disaster recovery, really fundamentally about building capacity. And so my background, my expertise, my passion for this work really starts in small communities. And at the IDC, I'll be honest, we haven't done a good enough job of engaging small communities. We haven't done a good enough job of engaging entrepreneurship and small business growth and focusing on those tools and resources that can really help to drive those outcomes. And quite frankly, we have spent some deep time and deep learning over the last 1.5 years, but we still have a lot more to do around this conversation around equitable economic outcomes. And that word and that verbiage is really important to me. It's very important to our organization because for far too long, many communities have been left behind. Communities of color, small communities, tribal communities. And so we as an organization are thinking deeply and engaging much more deeply in how we can be a better service to those communities. What tools and resources can we provide? How do we build capacity in the right ways? And how do we ensure that small business growth and entrepreneurship are at the heart of these conversations? So 1.5 years ago, we launched a brand new program called the Entrepreneurship Development Program. It is a certification program for entrepreneurship-led economic development. It's the first of its kind, at least in our realm, of helping communities think about how they can lead with entrepreneurship and small business growth at the heart of their economic development strategies. It is not exclusively focused on rural, but obviously there's a huge component of that work that is specifically focused on rural and tribal areas. For us, it is just the first step in this work. We are planning, and actually we're going through a strategic planning process right now where I know for a fact that this work is going to be a really key component of our strategy moving forward. I know that we want to invest more in the work. We want to collaborate and engage with other organizations, a lot of you in this room today and participating virtually. And we want to understand where we can play a role. Every organization has a role to play, and we want to make sure that we're a partner in that work. And so it is a transition, it's a transformation in many ways for us, but we're really excited to be a part of it and be engaged in it.
Thank you. Matt, what about Main Street? What's that shift been there?
Yeah. So, good morning, everyone. Good to be here. And for those in the virtual space, hello. We've got some Main Streeters out there. So, if you're not familiar with Main Street America, as Bill alluded to, I think over our 42+ year history, we've probably not been necessarily associated a great deal with the world of entrepreneurship and small business development. But I think what we've seen over certainly over the last 5 to 6 years, and then greatly accelerated during the pandemic, is that small businesses and entrepreneurs, especially in rural economies, are highly dependent on connectors, conveners of resources. And when we did a survey of our network, and our network is about 1,200 communities across the US, serving about 300,000 plus small businesses and entrepreneurs, what we found is Main Streets were really part of that sort of ecosystem, that support system when it came to connecting to things like PPP or EIDL. And as such, what we've started to see across the board and through our research agenda, that things are just becoming, one, hyper accelerated, the pace of change during the past few years. You saw this in e-commerce, where in essentially an 8-week period of time, in April and May of 2020, the e-commerce sales rose to the point that took 10 years previously. And then in remote work, for example, where we were at about 5%, it was growing. It wasn't like it was new, but quickly accelerated to 45% and upwards of 80 to 90%, depending on what sectors you were in. And so you've got this sort of combination in rural economies of accelerated pace of change for small business and much more complexity, I think, than ever before. From supply chain issues, these aren't big business issues, these are small business issues for sure, to dealing with price pressures, workforce challenges. There's not a community I go through in the US where a small business owner isn't talking about workforce challenges. And they don't necessarily have the same sort of support systems that larger organizations have. However, I think there's also what has been happening over the global with the global pandemic is we've seen a lot of opportunity with supporting small businesses in rural economies. And I'll just touch briefly on some of those that we're seeing. I talked about a little bit about remote work and the rise. If you look at Gallup poll, if you saw what was happening with Redfin, Zillow, et cetera, small towns, rural places were sort of the top of the list of where people wanted to go. And certainly there are new norm situations there. But if you look at your rural economy, we did a big project in Virginia, and remote workers that were coming to small communities in Virginia had incomes of 4 to 5 times local incomes. That can lead to investment pools for small businesses and entrepreneurs, a wealth of new human capital, assets of skill sets that can be prevalent in those communities. And there's a lot of sort of tie-ins between remote work and entrepreneurs in terms of their sort of affinity for going into business, whether that's a partner, a trailing spouse, what have you, or them themselves. And we've seen that in another number of rural communities. Certainly, we've had this great rise in entrepreneurship called the sort of COVIDpreneur. I'm not sure I want to be associated with being a COVIDpreneur, but nonetheless, we have about 4.5 million more businesses that started in 2020 and 2021 than we had in 2019. And many of those were in rural economies. And so being able to leverage that, being able to build support systems, and I know we'll talk probably a little bit more about ecosystem building, but I think that's a great opportunity for rural economies to sort of leverage that new kind of emerging pipeline out there. Some of the other changes that we're seeing out there is just really in consumerism. I think when we had all the shutdowns of small business owners, and communities really got to see what it was like when your mom and pop, your small businesses, your main streets were closed. That was not a pretty sight. That was not a great thing in terms of like your quality of life. Much like a school system or a park system, main streets and downtowns and small businesses became part of that sort of quality of life factor. And I think for the first time, as we've seen this rise in digital and social commerce, there are wonderful opportunities if we can provide them the support for small businesses to really leverage that growth. because experience in an online situation isn't all that great. Okay. But from a market perspective, small businesses have great potential in leveraging and expanding their trade area in rural economies if they can do that. And then finally, and this is probably a little bit out there, but automation's coming to small business. You know, it happened in agriculture, it happened in manufacturing, and we'll certainly see it happening in terms of new technology infusion into small businesses in rural economies. But the support systems aren't necessarily there. But leveraging on-demand content and agglomerating that and using our sort of our structure to be able to do that, peer-to-peer learning networks, these are all really critical factors that small businesses are going to need to be competitive from a rural perspective. But there's opportunity there. And then finally, in terms of equitable ecosystem building, Annie Casey Foundation, they had a stat that they used about 31% of all newcomers, new incoming populations within rural economies are new immigrants. And we've got a big initiative up in Maine, and they have a common language throughout Maine. They call them New Mainers. And they're working really, really hard about how to build up support systems for new immigrant markets coming into rural economies, whether that's in language, business support, workforce development. All of this makes a big difference in how we support businesses in rural economies.
Thanks, Matt. Now I'm going to the other Matt. Probably should have separated you two.
Yeah. There's a lot of Matts here, by the way.
Together, I recognize that my primary purpose here today is to be the backup Matt. We also have an emergency Matt who has moved into the city. Nice problem. Yeah, thanks, Bill, for the introduction, and thanks to Rural List for the invitation to be able to talk about our work. I'm with the Safety and Justice National Program at List. We're actually List's oldest national program, and that comes from the recognition that for any type of development to really be effective, people have to be able to feel safe in the places that they're going to or staying in. You know, I think we're at a time where the approach to small businesses has really changed in our work, not so much for List's safety approach, right? But because of a growing body of evidence around the types of intervention that we do. And also, I think a renewed interest and recognition that holistic crime prevention has to be part of any response to safety issues in the community. And really talking about kind of a List's approach to safety started with foundations in this idea of a crime triangle. For any criminal event to take place, three things have to exist. We're used to concentrating on victims, we're used to concentrating on offenders, but there also has to be an environment in which that can take place. And so for the past 25 plus years, when LISC has been involved in safety work, we really have focused on addressing those spaces where problems can occur, and how do we change physical environments to make them safer and make them feel safer. And we found over the past 20 years, especially that there's a growing body of research that backs up place-based approaches to crime and really shows that changing physical space can have a huge impact. And that combines with a holistic approach, thanks to our local partners, supported by evidence around the ideas of collective efficacy and social cohesion. And what collective efficacy is essentially is do you feel that your community has your back, that you can trust your neighbors? A way to measure that is, if you are in trouble, would your neighbors pick up the phone and call? That's often a question used on surveys to measure collective efficacy. Social cohesion, the idea that I'm using those places around me and part of my neighborhood. Do I go to the local park? Do I use a library close by? Do I shop in small businesses next to me? And what we know about both collective efficacy and social cohesion is that when feelings of that are higher and the community crime is lower, regardless of all other factors. And so taking these guiding principles into account, a large part of our work is focusing on creating those places that we can build community, creating spaces where people feel safe, creating third places, right? Those places outside of home and outside of work where people can gather and create community. And a lot of that, especially in small towns, then focuses on kind of the small business districts as places people are going to anyway. So how do we make that an experience and a gathering point rather than just a utilitarian location? And so that's been much of the focus. We have a consultant out of Michigan who talks about the rule of 10 when you're thinking about locations for small businesses and that community gathering spot, make sure that it's built for at least 10 uses. Because if it's just a place to go into a shop and buy something and then you leave, when people aren't doing that, the place is vacant. So how do we activate these spaces and create community centers? And again, talking about how we work to create safer spaces, building collaborative partnerships, which again, not surprisingly with LISC and through our history has often included community development corporations. But when you're in areas that include commercial activities, we found that small business owners, especially with their dedication to the community, are often the best partners to have at the table, right? They're thinking about how do we make this a space where my business can thrive, but how can we also make this a space where the community that I'm part of thrives? Focusing again on that authentic engagement of the community. How do we create the spaces that people want to see? And that includes places to be and meet their needs. I'm looking at my cheat sheet too. So, some examples in places we've worked: Corning, California, a small town in one of the Central Valleys in California, I'm not sure which one, of about 8,000, focused on a problem multifamily housing place, but also rebuilding the downtown Main Street that had really fallen kind of silent after the expansion of an interstate through the area, with commercial activity moving to gas stations just off the interstate, right? So how do we build those places again? Working in Greenville, Mississippi, looking at things like reentry and workforce development. Especially, we find small business can be very important to the reentry population because standard employment opportunities are so far out of reach. Working on expungement to get rid of records so people can move into employment, but also, again, rebuilding the small downtown commercial corridor and looking at the places around it where people don't feel safe at certain times of day, and how do we help develop that into something that is an attraction to the community. Some of the projects we've been able to work with Gale Consultancy and Robert Wood Johnson Foundation on the Inclusive Healthy Places Framework, which is a guide to developers in creating these public spaces. You're all experts in most of what you do around that. And this is a guide that helps you kind of fill out the full circle of creating spaces people want to go to, feel good about going to. And we'll provide resources and links after the conference, I guess. I think there's going to be email going out. And I just want to make the pitch that LISC so often gets to make. If you're interested in taking this type of approach to safety in your community, we have money. LISC and the Safety and Justice team is partnering with the U.S. Department of Justice on a rural violent crime reduction initiative. And we are able to make multi-year grants for creating safer spaces, looking at creating partnerships that address violence in communities in rural areas and small towns. We'll send out information on that program as well. We're finishing up kind of the beta application period, but next spring we should have a pretty large application and funding pool available.
Great, thanks, Matt. One of the things that is interesting about the world of economic development is that it's very decentralized and very thoroughly covers the United States. I mean, like every county, I think every county in the United States probably has some form of economic development organization, and those are your memberships. And so when you think about folks that are here today and online, sitting in rural America, working in rural America,
you can say pretty universally, there's somebody to talk to about economic development in your community. And I think the question, though, is, traditionally, the folks in community development and economic development haven't always felt like they were working on the same team. And I think those of us who are thinking about the future of this field see much more overlap. Question is, what practically can people do to have stronger partnerships with their local economic development organization?
Oh, it's a good question. It's an important question. And I think, especially the last 3 years, but quite frankly, the last decade, we've started to see community development, economic development, and workforce development all start to come together. There's a realization that you can't do one without the other, And if you're not in conversations with those leaders in workforce development or community development or economic development, you're missing a great opportunity. And so part of it is being willing to reach out. Part of it is being willing to invite people to your table, but also to show up at theirs. And that's really critical because especially in small communities, oftentimes those conversations have been siloed. And we're not doing ourselves, we're not doing our communities, our regions a service by doing that. It is often, economic development has always been a competitive game, right? I'm going to go after this company, or I'm going to set this opportunity up, maybe at the detriment of the community a couple miles down the road, or another one in your state, or even a neighboring state. And what I see as the future of economic development is really around collaboration. How do you build collaboration that is going to create quality of life in your community? It's going to create a nice and safe place for people to be. But it also is going to be collaborative, not just in spirit, but in practice. And so part of it is about reaching out. Part of it is about understanding the connectedness between community, economic, and workforce development. And part of it is about organizations like IDC and LISC and others sharing this message that it is really important for us to be working together, to be collaborating. We are working on a project alongside another organization called Engine that's going to be coming up here in the coming months, specifically focused on equity and economic development. We are launching a new program at IDC called the Economic Recovery Corps, which is a partnership with the National Association of Counties, the National League of Cities, the National Association of Development Organizations, the Regional Accelerator and Innovation Network, the Center on Rural Innovation, and the International City and County Managers Association. Those types of partnerships weren't happening 5, 10, maybe even 2 years ago. And so there's a growing realization that we as an organization have to be collaborative. Economic development is happening at the county level. It's happening at the city level. It is happening at the economic development and nonprofit level. It is happening at the state level. If we're all competing with one another, we're actually not helping our communities and regions in the way that we really, truly need to be. And so building partnerships, building collaboration, inviting people to your conversations and showing up to theirs is really critical to both building that trust, but also starting to bridge the gap between community, economic, and workforce development.
Thanks. Yeah, so this idea leads into the next kind of idea, which is building more equitable small business ecosystems in communities. And this idea that entrepreneurship doesn't happen in a vacuum. We just heard that from the undersecretary about the kinds of supports that have traditionally been there and that maybe have not well served entrepreneurs of color and how to change that today and some of the things he's working on. But also a lot of that work is very much local. It's the kind of partnerships you're talking about. Matt, maybe you could talk about with Main Street, like what does that ecosystem building look like tangibly? It's because that ecosystem building is very sort of ethereal sounding. Like, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, so first and foremost, it means going in and listening to people talk about what they want that ecosystem to look like, right? I think for us as a national program, representing a national organization, it means making sure that the money intended to create a safer neighborhood stays in that neighborhood, right? So often we see that experts come in, consultants come in, and they do work and they get paid, and that money that was meant for a neighborhood leaves, right? So how do we focus on making sure that the money stays in the place it was intended to benefit? An example, not from a rural place, but from Worcester, Massachusetts, in the Main South neighborhood, was developing a community ambassador program, right? To have somebody in that neighborhood, which is a main street, right? Main, there just to do the simple things of making sure that the street looks nice and greeting people who are there to shop, and having that friendly voice that is the face of the neighborhood rather than leaving it up to random encounters, which are not always great, especially in Minnesota, but getting better.
Yeah. And how are Main Street managers serving in more in that role of ecosystem builders, or are they? Does that happen?
Yeah, I think definitely, as I mentioned before, I think what's been happening is if you think about an ecosystem is one, typically no one owns it, right? It's a support system made up of multiple different partners that are sort of aligning capacity and resources. But what it does depend highly on is a connector, someone that convenes the conversations, makes those strategic connections that are so viable to having a support system. And I think when you look at a lot of rural communities, there's not always the strong capacity there. And so in some cases that might come from a local economic development corporation or a chamber, but it might also be the local Main Street manager. And so I think what we're seeing is there's great opportunities for that collaboration, and then using Main Street as sort of the convening connector piece, which they do very well because they've built up a lot of trust with small businesses and entrepreneurs.
Those of you who are thinking about questions, feel free to kind of start maybe queuing up or starting to send those in. One thing that we've seen is that in some places you have very sophisticated ecosystem building conversations happening, and LISC and our LISC partners play the role of really trying to make sure that those conversations are as centered on equity as they can be, and also that the voices of people from the communities we work in are represented in those conversations. And other times we're in places where there just hasn't been much conversation between the different key organizations, so it's a matter of actually just getting started on even crossing those silos that are there, even in small communities that are silos. And starting to get folks together in an intentional way to talk about how to collaborate. Anybody want to throw out a good story about where you've seen that happen?
Up here?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I meant we've had a strong project in Georgia through Georgia Power with 6 rural communities in Georgia around ecosystem building. And I think what we've found largely is that there's that sort of partnering that takes place, but a couple things that don't happen that rises to a level of having a functioning support system. One, there's not a lot, and I think there'll be a lot of changes here, is getting groups to actually do planning together. When we have these organizations, right, we tend to have our own sort of work plans, and there may be some things that we do jointly, but I think in a comprehensive and a really strong ecosystem that supports small businesses, you got to have those conversations, and the plans have to align and the resources have to align. Otherwise, there's just not enough capacity and resources there. So a big part of our ecosystem building process in Georgia was really creating those conversations in which joint planning could take place. And so everyone's sort of moving in the same direction. And it doesn't then just go back and you go back to your own organization and you're doing your work, but the support system's just kind of nebulous and out there. So I think that's a big important piece.
I'll give you 2 quick examples. There's a group of 6 communities in Ohio, all small communities, all 10,000 or less in population. Actually, all but one are 5,000 or less in population. And for the last 3 years, they've been collaborating around entrepreneurship-led economic development work. And they've been sharing with one another what they're working on. They've been collaborating and building opportunities and thinking about how the region benefits one another. So that's one example on the local level. On the national level, several years ago, we started a group called Rural Rise, which is focused exclusively on rural entrepreneurship and ecosystem builders, as Matt just talked about. And it was an opportunity to bring people together to talk about the work that they're doing. But quite frankly, it was also an opportunity for people to realize they're not in this work alone. That oftentimes in small communities, you can feel like you're the only person doing this work. And so there's an opportunity for us to bring people from across the United States together to say, you're not alone. There are hundreds, if not thousands of people doing this work that you can work from, collaborate with. It was a great opportunity. We started with a summit in West Virginia. We've been now to Arkansas. We were just in Kansas. And what we really learned is not just the connections that you build in those summits, But on a monthly basis, we're bringing that group together to talk about a new topic or a new area. We've had exchanges happen between communities in West Virginia and Kansas and other places where they go and they visit and see firsthand what's happening in those communities. And so the power of connecting people and building that connectedness across the work in entrepreneurship is really, really important.
Yeah, and I think for us, a focus is process, right? So for bringing groups together that haven't worked together, we focus on collective problem solving. And when we talk about problem solving from a context of safety, it's being very, very specific. So you don't say we're going to fix a neighborhood, right? You say we're going to fix a specific vacant lot that may be 2 lots down from a bar that has problems after the bar lets out, right? And so how do you bring people together who may be able to provide different solutions that give you a range of short, medium, and long-term responses to what may have been a persistent problem in a specific neighborhood, and through working together, right, through collective action, especially with the focus on place, which can be much more comfortable than in a context of crime, right? Trying to focus on people. If we can focus on the physical spaces, how do we fix that and work together? We prove ourselves to one another about our intentions, build relationships through collective problem solving, and set a template for moving on then to the next problem.
I think a concept of place being a way to focus these conversations is a powerful one for this group, as far as a lot of community development grows out of place and people who a lot of different perspectives care about a place. And sometimes trying to get systems to align in like a hypothetical way or organizational structure way is a lot harder than saying, okay, let's just find something to work on together and a place we're going to focus those efforts. And that's a way to start to build the relationships that then can lead to the systems working better together. So any questions out here?
Yeah, John Niederman again. I'm working in Huntington, Indiana, my hometown. It's a ruralist town. And we just started to create a entrepreneurial leadership council there. And we've got entrepreneurs on the council. We're trying to get local officials on the council, Main Street folks on the council, for just pretty much everyone we can think of, and banks and others, to try and raise up the identity of our small businesses as critical in our community, and then also to do some talent scouting and trusted connecting with those who want to start up a business, or maybe want to move to the community that and be either as a remote worker, but potentially even as a entity or a person who wants to start their business there. And Huntington is a losing population, which was mentioned earlier. Many rural communities are losing populations. And in our first meeting, I'm telling you a long story because I think it generates what I've been hearing from you all, is that in the first meeting, one of our local entrepreneurs said, well, we need a model. Can you go out and find what some of the best models are across the country so that we can begin to adapt them for here? And then he went on to say, and he was absolutely right, we also need a staff person who's going to shepherd this and move it forward. And interesting enough, I'm working with the Chamber of Commerce because our local Lido executive says, all I want to do is traditional economic development. And I've known this gentleman for years, and so I know that that's all he wants to do. And we're trying to change his mind a little bit, but that's there. So what I'm curious about from a modeling standpoint is those models that exist out there that center what you said earlier, Nathan, is the heart of an entrepreneurial development effort is entrepreneurism versus maybe smokestack chasing, especially in rural communities. And but secondly, you got local elected officials that are used to funding the Lidos with their tax dollars, and they use up all of their capital, so to speak, with that effort, and there's little left over for anything else. Have you seen examples where local elected officials have been influenced to potentially look at investing in entrepreneur ecosystems?
It's a great question. It's an important one because there are limited resources, and you're exactly right. Most local elected officials, and quite frankly, most economic developers have always thought about economic development one way. What we've seen, especially over the last 3 to 5 years, is a growing trend to move much more towards entrepreneurship-led economic development, but there's a long way still to go. There are absolutely examples, and I'd be happy to share some with you afterwards, of communities that have done just that. Part of it is an education and advocacy process with your local elected officials to help them understand why this is important. I think the single biggest factor in that, especially for small communities, is talking about how you embed wealth locally. How do you make sure that whatever you're investing in, whatever strategies you're investing in, are going to keep wealth locally? And that's not just financial wealth. That is also building other assets in the community. It is building a cohort of folks, as you just talked about with your leadership council. And so part of it is the smokestack chasing has left many communities behind, right? You may be successful in bringing one company or one industry in, but if that industry or that company falls upon hard times, then your community is left upon hard times. And entrepreneurship and small business growth is centered around a diversity of opportunities in your community. And obviously those people are engaged in your community. So it helps to embed the wealth in that community and keep the wealth there. And so that's where I would start the conversation. But we're also in conversations with NACO and others about how do we develop new opportunities to actually train and educate local elected officials, county elected officials, et cetera, around a whole variety of economic development approaches.
Can I just give a few resources that you might want to look at? One, we did a national survey about 2,500 businesses across the country, and 70% of those businesses were started from folks that were already in the community. So I think leveraging your internal human capital, like the return on investment is just so much greater. And that was across sectors. So even with your larger manufacturing employees, it's basically about 58% were started there. They weren't recruited. You didn't have to pay them a bunch of money. They were there. The second is in terms of like building out the pipeline and what that can do, to Nathan's point around like resiliency within economic resiliency within communities. GoDaddy has done quite a bit of research around micro ventures. And you can actually look up for your county. If you go to their Empower website, you can kind of see what your density levels are and where you might need to give some more support. And we'll also give you some other data that you can use around, well, what does that do for resiliency? What does that do for wealth generation in our community? So that might be another resources to leverage.
I think we have time for one more question. So we'll.
And it's a twofer.
It's
all right. Justin Birch, Lisk. I swear I'm not a plant, but I have two questions. First one is for Nathan. So due to time constraints, you really didn't get to dive in into the core and what their work will be and sort of the mission of that, but also what that will mean to rural places. So that's question one, and we'll parking lot it for a second. Question number two is to Bill. So there's lots of programmatic approaches here that are happening in rural America. In your role as a CDFI, how are you aggregating those together towards cohesive economic development? So how about we start with Nathan and then we'll end with Bill to take it home.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
I'm also like amazed by your socks. I just wanted to give you
Well,
a compliment. They're amazing.
My kids, for every Father's Day, Christmas, birthday, I get cool socks. So I always wear the socks as loudly and proudly as I can. So thank you for asking about the Economic Recovery Corps. It has two main goals. One is to actually build capacity in local communities and in economic development organizations. We're going to have up to 65 fellows, and obviously we're going to be looking for host organizations to host those fellows. Probably in the late spring, we'll open that application period up, but it will be a 3-year fellowship, fully funded by us. We will pay fully for the fellow to be embedded directly in an economic development organization, a county government, local entrepreneur support organization, what have you. With the goal of building capacity in that community, helping them to convene stakeholders and really push for more equitable economic outcomes in those communities. The second goal of it is to create a pipeline of the next generation of leaders in economic development. And so we're going to be engaging deeply with Lisk and many other organizations to both get the word out about the opportunity for organizations to host and for individuals that really want to get this training. We will fully train them. We're offering all of our training courses for free to these fellows. All of our partners are doing the same. There's going to be opportunities to learn if you're embedded in the county government, what is county government's role in economic development? What is an entrepreneur support organization's role and how do they drive opportunities in their regions? And rural and tribal areas will be a really significant focus for us to make sure that we have opportunities to embed those fellows in rural and tribal communities. All of it focused on hopefully some of the most distressed areas across the country to really truly build capacity.
Yeah, I'm excited about that program and that, many of you are familiar with the AmeriCorps program, which is great, but this is actually a little bit more experienced, mature, and also folks that will stick around a little longer, ideally 3 years at least, right? So it's folks that can really move the needle in economic development, inclusive economic development in your community. So I would definitely encourage you to focus on that opportunity when it happens. And we will be helping to get the word out on that. As far as how we bring all these threads together, I think place is the way we connect that back, and the communities that we have longstanding partnerships with are places where you can pull the workforce development element, the traditional economic development, the entrepreneurship support, and just the physical revitalization of many places that have been disinvested together is through the partnerships with organizations like many of yours that are focused on a place that and are care about and have been working in for decades. And that's, we've heard a couple of great examples about how that's the way to get these folks that maybe have not been connected from the traditional economic development world into partnership with community development. And maybe those folks, especially from workforce development, which sometimes is even harder to connect to, and involved in the work of financial opportunity centers, and is through this idea of thinking about, okay, this particular group of people who live in this particular community or have businesses in this area, how do we focus in and plan together, set some goals, set an agenda, and work together on those? And that's a way to build partnerships and start to thread these things together. Thank you all for participating, both in listening for our session, but also all of them. And for having us here to have this conversation. Thank each one of you for your great work and for joining us and sharing some of your experience. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bill, Nathan, and the two Matts, including backup Matt. Never a backup at LISC, always front and center. Thank you to everybody that has joined us this year for the third and final Rural Talks on the Hill in Washington, D.C. This year, we went through a variety of themes, starting with broadband, going into housing, and then ending on this note of workforce and small business supports. It has been an incredible year for 2022. Next year is going to look a little bit different. We're actually only going to have one rural seminar, right? Yes. And if you liked what you heard today and over the last 3 iterations of Rural Talks, please join us next year in 2023. This time, early December, we're going to be in Southern California. So more information to come on that front. So please stay tuned. I would be completely remiss, though, if we ended today without a huge word of acknowledgement. Thank you so much for LISC leadership, national policy team, economic development team, everybody else at National LISC, including Steve and on the lending side, for all of your work at bringing this together, not just for today's session, but for throughout 2022. A huge note of gratitude to the Rural LISC team. This is a team, people at the back of the room, that makes it all happen. Thank you so much, team, for everything that you do day in and day out. It was an absolute pleasure getting to meet and talk with so many of you today over the past few days. Thank you so much for making the trip to Washington, D.C. to be with us. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I cannot wait to get back into the sync of things again in 2023. Hope to see all of you in December in Southern California. So please monitor your emails, monitor our website. More information will be forthcoming. Thanks again. I hope you all enjoyed Rural Seminar. And to those on the virtual audience, thank you for your participation. If you weren't able to hear today's dialogues, all the videos will be uploaded to our website. They're also on the VFairs website, and also will soon be on a YouTube channel. So lots and lots to listen to in the coming weeks. Thank you again.